A boy who's failed the graduation exam twice. A boy who grew up alone, unloved, laughed at by an entire village that saw a monster where a child should have been. And there he is, standing on a fog-covered bridge in the land of waves, staring down a missing nin who could kill him with a single saban to the throat. If you've been following this channel, you already know the story of Naruto Uzumaki. You know about the 9 tails sealed inside him, the loneliness that shaped him, the dream of becoming Hokage that nobody believed in, except him. But what if I told you that the mission to Wave Country wasn't just another dangerous job on Team 7's record? What if it was the moment that should have changed everything, but in the world we know, barely changed anything at all? Welcome back to another What If, and this time, we're diving into a version of events where Team 7 doesn't just survive the land of waves. They learn from it. Really learn. Before you get comfortable, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this is a 10-chapter journey, and trust me, you don't want to miss where this one goes. Let's rewind to the bridge. The mist rolled in thick that morning, curling around the half-finished planks of what would one day be called the Great Naruto Bridge. Though on this day, it was just a battlefield soaked in fear and blood. Kakashi Hatake stood in the center of it, one eye covered by his forehead protector, the other locked onto the swirling silver blade of Zabuza Momochi's massive cleaver sword. Behind him, his 3 genin, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura, were doing everything they could just to stay alive. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Staying alive. Not fighting. Not winning. Surviving by the skin of their teeth, against enemies who were toying with them more than actually trying. Haku, the masked hunter nin with Ice User bloodline abilities, had trapped Sasuke inside a dome of mirrors, a technique so fast, so precise, that Saban needles rained down from every angle like a storm made of glass. Sasuke's Sharingan had awakened in the chaos, one tomo spinning weakly in his left eye, barely enough to track the blur of movement, let alone counter it. And Naruto? Naruto was screaming Sasuke's name, pounding uselessly against the ice mirrors, chakra spilling out of him in wild, undisciplined bursts that did nothing but exhaust him faster. He didn't understand what he was fighting. He didn't understand the technique. All he understood was that his teammate, his rival, his first real bond outside of Iruka-sensei, was being torn apart piece by piece, and there wasn't a single thing he could do about it. Sakura stood off to the side, guarding an unconscious Tazuna's grandson and gritting her teeth, feeling more useless than she'd ever felt in her life. She had memorized every technique in the academy textbooks. She had the highest written test scores in her class. And here, on a real battlefield, none of that mattered. Her chakra control, the one thing she was actually good at, sat completely untapped, because nobody had ever taught her how to use it for anything except walking up trees. Do you see the pattern forming here? 3 genin. 3 completely different kinds of potential. And not one of them equipped to use it when it actually mattered. Kakashi saw it too. Even as he traded blows with Zabuza, even as he poured every ounce of his concentration into countering a Jonin-level swordsman, some part of his mind, the part that had survived a war, that had watched teammates die, that had buried more people than any 20-something-year-old ever should have had to, was watching his students fail to protect themselves. And it terrified him. You already know how this fight ends, at least in the story you've heard 100 times before. Naruto breaks through Haku's ice mirrors with sheer stubborn will, tapping into something dark and red and furious buried deep inside him. Sasuke, on the verge of death, is saved not by his own strength but by Haku's hesitation, a hunter nin who couldn't bring himself to kill a boy who reminded him of everything he used to be. Zabuza is manipulated and discarded by Gato, the businessman who hired him, and in his final act turns against the man who betrayed him, dying alongside Haku in the snow. It's a beautiful story. It's tragic. It's the kind of arc that made an entire generation of anime fans fall in love with this show. But here's the question this series is built to ask. What if Kakashi didn't just move on from this mission the way he did in canon? What if, instead of shrugging it off as a hard fight, but we made it, he actually sat with how close he came to losing not one, but potentially all 3 of his students? Because let's be honest with each other for a second. If Haku hadn't hesitated, if that saban to Sasuke's neck had been thrown a half-second earlier, with actual killing intent, Sasuke Uchiha would have died on that bridge. Not knocked unconscious. Not saved by ninja plot armor. Dead. And if Naruto hadn't broken through his fear at exactly the right moment, hadn't found that surge of Kurama's chakra bubbling up from somewhere he didn't understand, he would have watched his first friend die in front of him. And there's no telling what that would have done to him. Kakashi Hatake, copy ninja of Konoha, student of the 4th Hokage, survivor of the 3rd Great Ninja War. He knew exactly how close they'd come. He'd seen it in real time. He'd felt his own chakra straining just to keep Zabuza occupied while his students fought for their lives 20 feet away, completely unable to help them because he was pinned down himself. That night, after the battle, after Gado's thugs had been driven off by the collective will of an entire village finally standing up for itself, after Tazuna's bridge was finally, truly free to be finished, Kakashi sat alone on the porch of the small house they'd been staying in, staring out at the water. He wasn't thinking about the mission report he'd have to file. He wasn't thinking about the bounty they hadn't collected, or the pay grade dispute this mission had technically become, given that it turned into an A-rank encounter instead of the C-rank escort job they'd signed up for. He was thinking about 3 faces. 3 genin who trusted him with their lives. 3 kids who had no idea how close they'd come to not making it home. If this were the version of the story you already know, this is the part where Team 7 goes home, gets a hero's welcome from Tazuna's village, boards a boat, and heads back to Konoha. A few weeks later, they're standing in front of a nomination board, and the Chūnin Exams begin. Naruto stumbles through the first 2 stages relying on stubbornness and the 9 tails. Sasuke barely survives an encounter with a snake-summoning missing nin who brands him with a curse seal that will haunt him for years. Sakura stands frozen while her 2 teammates are attacked, unable to do anything except protect their unconscious bodies with her own. Sound familiar? But this isn't that story. This is the what-if where Kakashi Hatake looks at his exhausted, injured, traumatized genin team and makes a decision that changes the entire trajectory of their lives. Let's go back inside the house, because this is where it starts. Naruto sat on the floor near the low table, one arm bandaged from where a saban had grazed him during the chaos of protecting an unconscious teammate. He was staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I couldn't do anything, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone in the room. Sasuke was dying right in front of me and I couldn't do anything until whatever that was happened. Sakura sat across from him, arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't said much since they'd gotten back. She kept replaying the moment Haku had appeared in front of her, ready to finish off Tazuna's grandson, and how she had thrown herself in the way with nothing but a kunai and pure desperation. It had worked barely. But barely wasn't a strategy. Barely wasn't something she could rely on next time. Sasuke, propped up against the wall with fresh bandages wound tight around his shoulder and chest, said nothing at all. His dark eyes were fixed on the middle distance, replaying saban needles raining down around him in a storm he had been completely unable to stop. He remembered the moment his legs had given out, not from injury, but from something worse. From realizing that his Sharingan, the bloodline he'd been told his entire life was the pride of his clan, the power that was supposed to make him strong enough to face his brother one day, hadn't been enough to save him. It hadn't been enough to save him from a boy roughly his own age. If it hadn't been for that same boy's hesitation, his unwillingness to deliver a killing blow, Sasuke Uchiha would have died face down on cold wooden planks, having barely scratched the surface of his own potential. Kakashi stood in the doorway, watching all 3 of them sit in silence, each wrapped in their own private reckoning. He'd seen this before. Not this exact scenario, but this exact silence. The particular quiet that settles over people who have looked death in the eye and come away changed by it. He'd worn that silence himself once, a long time ago, after a mission that had cost him people he loved. He thought about letting it go. About giving the standard speech, "You did well, you survived, that's what matters, we'll debrief properly back in the village," and moving on the way shinobi were trained to do. Bottle it up. Push forward. That was the way of the leaf. But something in him rebelled against that instinct tonight. "You're all thinking the same thing," Kakashi said, stepping into the room. 3 heads turned toward him. "You're thinking about how close it was. How much of what happened out there depended on things you didn't control. An enemy's hesitation, a burst of chakra you can't explain, a desperate gamble that happened to pay off." Nobody argued with him. Nobody could. "I want you to sit with that feeling," Kakashi continued, his visible eye unusually serious, none of its usual lazy amusement present. Because I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that you did everything right today. You survived. That's not the same thing. Naruto's head snapped up. So what, you're saying we're weak? We just fought a Jonin-level swordsman and his... I'm saying, Kakashi cut him off, not unkindly, that you fought a battle you weren't prepared for, and you got lucky. All three of you. And luck is not something I'm willing to bet your lives on again. The room went quiet. Here's something worth pointing out, because it's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. In the story you already know, Kakashi Hatake is often praised for being laid back, for reading his little orange books at inappropriate times, for showing up hours late to just about everything. It's part of his charm. But underneath all of that is a man who lost his entire Genin team once, Obito, Rin, and himself standing over the wreckage of what should have been a lifetime of friendship. Cut short by war and tragedy and choices made too young, Kakashi Hatake knew, better than almost anyone in Konoha, exactly what it felt like to fail the people you were supposed to protect. And on that bridge in the land of waves, staring across the water at a mission that had almost ended in the deaths of 3 children he'd sworn to guide, something in him refused to let history repeat itself. He wasn't going to lose this team. Not to a missing Nin swordsman, not to Gado's thugs, and certainly not to the far greater dangers he knew were coming. Dangers the Chūnin Exams would only be the beginning of. So what do we do? Sakura asked quietly. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question, the kind that came from someone who had spent her whole life believing that hard work and preparation were the answer to every problem, and who had just discovered, on a fog-covered bridge, that book knowledge and hard work weren't nearly enough on their own. Kakashi crouched down so he was more at eye level with his students. When we get back to Konoha, the Chūnin Exam nominations are going to be right around the corner. Normally, I'd put your names forward without a second thought. You've technically completed enough missions, and on paper you're ready. But, Sasuke said, the single word carrying more weight than a full sentence. But I watched today what happens when the 3 of you are pushed past what you've actually trained for, Kakashi said. Naruto, your chakra control is dangerous. Not because you don't have enough chakra, you clearly have plenty, but because you don't know how to use it precisely. That gap very nearly cost you today. Naruto opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, thinking of the wasted bursts of energy, the desperate flailing against Haku's ice mirrors that accomplished nothing until something else, something much bigger, much angrier, had taken over. Sasuke, Kakashi continued, your Sharingan is developing faster than I expected, which tells me you have real potential in that bloodline. But raw potential without proper training is a liability. You tried to use techniques your body wasn't ready to control, and it almost got you killed. Sasuke's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. And Sakura. Kakashi's gaze softened slightly as he turned to her. You have the best chakra control on this team, maybe the best I've seen in a genin in years. And you've never been taught how to use it for anything except walking up a tree. Sakura blinked, surprised. Best chakra control? Nobody had ever told her that before. Nobody had ever told her anything she was good at before, not really. Not compared to constant comparisons to Sasuke's talent or Naruto's stubborn tenacity. I'm not telling you all of this to make you feel bad about yourselves, Kakashi said, standing back up. I'm telling you this because I think, no, I know, that if we go back to Konoha and jump straight into Chūnin Exam nominations, we are going to walk into something far more dangerous than a rogue swordsman and his apprentice. And I am not willing to let you walk into that unprepared. So what are you saying? Naruto asked, some of the old fire creeping back into his voice, mixed now with something new, a genuine hunger to actually understand what he'd been missing. Kakashi allowed himself the faintest smile beneath his mask. I'm saying that when we get home, I'm going to ask the Hokage for something unusual. Time. Real training time, before we even think about entering the exams. The journey back to Konoha took several days, most of it spent on a boat cutting through calm waters. Waves lapping quietly against the hull as the coastline of the land of waves faded behind them. It should have been a peaceful trip. A victory lap, of sorts, after a hard-won mission. Tazuna had insisted they take supplies for the road, dried fish, rice, fresh fruit picked that morning, jugs of water and juice from the local market for the journey. because nobody in that boat needed anything stronger than that to celebrate having survived. But there was no celebration in the air. Not really. Sakura sat near the bow of the boat, watching the water churn beneath them, and found her mind drifting back to that moment when Haku had appeared directly in front of her, ready to end things instantly. She thought about the way her hands had shaken, the way her training, years of academy lessons, memorized scrolls, careful notes, had utterly failed to prepare her for the reality of a blade meant to kill. She thought about what Kakashi had said. Best chakra control I've seen in a genin in years. If that was true, why hadn't anyone taught her how to use it properly? Why had she spent years being told she was the smart one while Naruto and Sasuke got all the attention for raw power and bloodline gifts? She clenched her fists in her lap. Whatever training Kakashi was about to propose, she promised herself she wasn't going to waste a single second of it. A few feet away, Naruto leaned against the railing, staring out at nothing in particular. He kept flexing his fingers, remembering the strange, hot surge of chakra that had poured out of him in the final moments of the fight against Haku. Chakra that didn't feel entirely like his own. He didn't fully understand what had happened. He just knew that it had been powerful, and reckless, and completely out of his control. He thought about Iruka-sensei, about the ramen shop, about all the people back in Konoha who still looked at him sideways sometimes, still whispered things they thought he couldn't hear. He thought about the promise he made himself years ago, that he would become Hokage, that he would make every single person who doubted him eat their words. But you couldn't become Hokage by getting lucky on a bridge. You couldn't protect the people you cared about by relying on some mysterious burst of power you didn't understand and couldn't summon on command. If Kakashi-sensei was offering real training that would actually teach him to control the monstrous amount of chakra he apparently had, Naruto wasn't about to let that opportunity slip through his fingers. Sasuke stood apart from both of them, near the stern of the boat, arms crossed, dark eyes fixed on the horizon. He'd said very little since the bridge, and even less since Kakashi's conversation the night before. He kept thinking about the mirrors. About being trapped, helpless, while Saban rained down from every direction, his Sharingan spinning uselessly, too slow, too undeveloped to track the speed of his opponent. He thought about the humiliating truth of it, that he, an Uchiha, heir to a bloodline whispered about throughout the entire shinobi world, had come within an inch of dying at the hands of someone who wasn't even trying to kill him. He thought about his brother. About the gap between where he currently stood and where he needed to be if he was ever going to have even the faintest chance of standing against Itachi one day. The bridge had shown him, in the clearest terms possible, just how far that gap really was. If Kakashi was offering a way to close it, even a little, Sasuke intended to take everything that training had to offer and wring every last drop of usefulness out of it. By the time Konoha's familiar gates came into view, the tall wooden walls, the distinctive silhouette of the Hokage monument carved into the cliffside overlooking the village, something had shifted among the three genin of Team 7. It wasn't obvious. There were no dramatic declarations, no group hugs, nothing that would have made for a tidy montage moment. But there was a quiet, shared understanding settling over all three of them. Whatever they had believed about their own strength before Wave Country was wrong, and whatever Kakashi was about to propose, none of them intended to waste it. The village welcomed them back with its usual mix of indifference and routine. Vendors called out their wares in the market square. Children chased each other through the streets, laughing, oblivious to the fact that three of their fellow genin had just returned from a mission that had nearly gotten all of them killed. Life in Konoha moved on, as it always did, regardless of what happened outside its walls. Kakashi split off from his students almost immediately after passing through the village gates. "Go home, get some real rest, eat something that isn't dried rations," he told them. "I have somewhere I need to be." "Where?" Naruto asked, though something in his gut already suspected the answer. Kakashi's visible eye crinkled into that familiar upside-down U-shape that passed for a smile beneath his mask. "To go ask for something I'm not entirely sure I'm going to get." The Hokage's office sat at the top of a narrow tower overlooking the village, its round windows offering a clear view of the rooftops below, the distant training grounds, the great stone faces carved into the cliff. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat behind his desk exactly where he always sat, a stack of paperwork in front of him that never seemed to shrink no matter how many hours he devoted to it. He looked up as Kakashi entered, closing the door quietly behind him. Kakashi, the old Hokage said, setting down his brush. I trust the mission to the Land of Waves went well, given that you're standing here instead of in a hospital bed, though I understand from the preliminary report that it turned into considerably more than the C-rank escort job you were assigned. That's putting it mildly, Kakashi said. He crossed the room and stood in front of the desk, and for a moment said nothing at all, just stood there, weighing exactly how to phrase what he'd come to ask. The Hokage studied him carefully. He'd known Kakashi since the boy was young, had watched him grow from a prodigy pushed too hard, too fast, into a jonin who carried more weight on his shoulders than most people twice his age. He recognized the particular stillness in Kakashi's posture. It was the look of a man who had come to ask for something he considered important, and who wasn't entirely sure how the answer would land. Out with it then, Hiruzen said, not unkindly. Kakashi took a breath. Lord Hokage, I want to request a delay in Team 7's nomination for the upcoming Chūnin Exams. Whatever the Hokage had been expecting, it clearly wasn't that. He set down his pipe, unlit, as always, more habit than anything else these days, and leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. A delay, he repeated. Your team has more than met the mission quota required for nomination. By every technical measure, they qualify. I'm aware, Kakashi said. But qualifying on paper and being ready to survive what the exams actually put in front of them are two very different things. I watched all three of my genin nearly die on that bridge in the Land of Waves. Not because they lack potential. They have more raw potential than almost any team I've seen come through the academy in years, but because none of them have had the proper training to actually use that potential when it matters. The Hokage was quiet for a long moment, considering. You understand what you're asking, he said eventually. The Chūnin Exams only come around periodically. If I grant you this delay, your team won't just be sitting out this cycle. You're asking me to hold off on submitting their names at all until you believe they're ready. Which could mean missing this exam window entirely, and waiting for the next one. I understand, Kakashi said, and there was no hesitation in his voice at all. I'm asking anyway. Hiruzen studied his former student's student, Kakashi, who had once been the youngest genin, then Chūnin, then jonin in the village's recent history, whose own path had been defined by being pushed forward too quickly, by responsibilities placed on his shoulders before he was ready to carry them. There was a certain irony in watching Kakashi Hatake, of all people, argue for patience. Tell me honestly, the Hokage said. Is this about protecting your team, or is this about something you saw in them out there, something you think is worth the risk of delay? Kakashi considered the question carefully. Both, he admitted. Naruto has more chakra than genin twice his age, but no control over it. Sasuke's Sharingan is developing faster than his body can currently support, which is as dangerous as it is impressive. And Sakura, she has the sharpest mind and the finest chakra control I've seen in years, and nobody has ever bothered to teach her how to use either one for anything beyond tree-walking exercises. He paused. They're not weak, Lord Hokage. They're unfinished. And I would rather take the time to finish shaping them properly than send them into an exam that has, historically, gotten genin killed. Especially with everything else currently in motion that I suspect you're already aware of. That last line hung in the air a moment longer than the rest. The Hokage's eyes narrowed slightly, and Kakashi knew, the way he always seemed to know things he probably shouldn't, that the old man understood exactly what kind of everything else he was referring to. Rumors traveled through the upper ranks of Konoha's shinobi forces, quiet and careful, about strange movements near the borders. About a certain snake-summoning missing nin who hadn't been seen or heard from in years, and who had a habit of resurfacing exactly when the village least expected it. The Hokage was quiet for a long moment, weighing the request against everything else currently balanced on his shoulders. The safety of an entire village, the political relationships with other hidden villages participating in the upcoming exams, the expectations already set in motion by prior arrangements. Finally, he spoke. How much time are you asking for? Kakashi didn't hesitate. 6 weeks. Maybe a little more, depending on how quickly they progress. I want to run each of them through individualized training suited to what I saw in the Land of Waves. Real training, not academy drills. And I want to bring in additional instruction where I can't provide it myself. The Hokage considered this, fingers steepled in front of him. "You're aware this puts you in an unusual position," he said. "Other Jonin sensei will submit their teams on schedule. Your team will be conspicuously absent from that list, and people will ask why." "Let them ask," Kakashi said simply. "I'd rather explain a delay than attend 3 funerals." The bluntness of the statement seemed to settle something in the old Hokage's expression. He nodded slowly, reaching for his brush once more. "Very well. I'll grant your request, 6 weeks, with the understanding that if your team isn't ready by the next exam cycle after that, we revisit this conversation." "But Kakashi," the Hokage's tone sharpened slightly, enough to make it clear this wasn't a suggestion, "I expect results. If I'm going to justify holding back a team with your students' potential, I need to see that potential realized." "Understood," Kakashi said, and for the first time since walking into the office, something like genuine relief passed behind his visible eye. He turned to leave, already running through a mental list of what came next: training grounds to secure, techniques to plan, outside instructors to consider for Sakura's specialized development, elemental affinity testing for Naruto, careful monitoring for Sasuke's rapidly developing Sharingan. "Kakashi." He paused at the door, glancing back. The Hokage was watching him with an expression that was difficult to read, something between pride and quiet concern. "Whatever happened out there in the land of waves clearly shook you. I hope, for your sake and theirs, that 6 weeks is enough." Kakashi thought about the ice mirrors closing in around Sasuke, about Naruto's chakra spiraling out of control, about Sakura frozen with nothing but a kunai between her and death. "So do I," he said quietly, and stepped out of the office. Down in the village, unaware of the conversation that had just taken place high above them, Naruto Uzumaki sat on his usual stool at Ichiraku Ramen, staring down at a bowl he hadn't touched yet. Across the counter, old man Tuchi and his daughter Ayam exchanged a concerned glance. It wasn't like Naruto to leave ramen sitting untouched for this long. "Something on your mind?" Ayam asked gently, setting down a fresh cup of tea beside him. The same steaming green tea he always drank there, nothing stronger, nothing that would have felt out of place in a quiet ramen stand at the edge of a ninja village. Naruto looked up, and for once, there was none of his usual bright, boastful energy in his expression. Just a quiet, simmering determination that hadn't been there before Wave Country. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I almost lost someone important to me. And I couldn't do anything about it, not really, not with any actual control. It was just luck." Ayam blinked, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "I'm done relying on luck," Naruto said, more to himself than to her, finally picking up his chopsticks. "Next time, I'm going to actually be strong enough to protect the people I care about, however long it takes." Across the village, in the quiet, mostly empty compound that had once housed an entire clan and now held only one weary, grieving boy, Sasuke Uchiha sat on the floor of his room, staring at his own reflection in a small hand mirror, watching the faint outline of his awakened Sharingan fade in and out as he tested his control over it, over and over, until his head throbbed with the strain. He thought about Haku's ice mirrors, about how close it had come to being over. He thought about training. Real training. Whatever Kakashi was about to propose, Sasuke intended to push it further than his sensei probably expected, because falling short again wasn't an option he was willing to accept. And in a modest house near the edge of the village, Sakura Haruno sat at her desk, an old academy scroll open in front of her, the same chakra control theory she'd memorized years ago, back when it was just information to recite for a written exam. She read through it again now, slower this time, actually thinking about what each principle meant in practice rather than just committing it to memory. Best chakra control I've seen in a genin in years. She wasn't going to let that potential go to waste. Not after nearly watching Tazuna's grandson die because she hadn't known how to do anything except stand there with a kunai and hope. The morning after his conversation with the Hokage, Kakashi arrived at Training Ground 7 exactly on time. If that sentence feels wrong to you, if some instinct in the back of your mind is screaming that Kakashi Hatake does not, under any circumstances, arrive anywhere on time, you're right. It felt wrong to Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura too, all three of whom stood at the training ground with matching expressions of disbelief as their sensei strolled up at the exact moment the sun cleared the tree-line. No excuses about black cats or old ladies needing help crossing muddy roads. You're early, Sakura said slowly, as if she wasn't entirely convinced she wasn't dreaming. On time, Kakashi corrected, tucking his ever-present orange book into his weapons pouch instead of reading it. There's a difference, and given what I'm about to tell you, I figured showing up late for once wouldn't exactly help my case. Naruto crossed his arms, still not entirely sure what to expect. None of them had slept particularly well. Kakashi's brief comment on the boat ride home, about asking for something unusual from the Hokage, had left all three of them turning possibilities over in their heads late into the night. Well? Are you gonna tell us what's going on, or do we have to guess? Kakashi looked at each of them in turn. Naruto, practically vibrating with restless energy despite the exhaustion still lingering behind his eyes. Sasuke, arms folded, expression carefully neutral in that way that told you he was thinking about something he wasn't ready to say out loud. Sakura, alert, a small notebook already tucked under one arm out of habit, ready to write down anything worth remembering. I went to the Hokage yesterday, Kakashi said, and I requested a delay on our team's nomination for the Chūnin Exams. Silence. For a long moment, none of the three genin said anything at all. Naruto's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Sakura's grip tightened on her notebook. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, though whether from frustration or calculation, it was hard to say. You what? Naruto finally managed. Why would you do that? I thought we were finally gonna get our shot at becoming Chūnin. You will, Kakashi said calmly. Just not yet. And not until I'm confident the three of you can survive what the exam actually throws at you, instead of scraping by on luck and desperation the way you did in the Land of Waves. Naruto's jaw tightened. Some old, familiar defensiveness flared up in his chest, the same instinct that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count, the urge to prove people wrong through sheer stubborn force rather than actually listening to what they were telling him. But then he thought about the ice mirrors, about Sasuke collapsing, about the strange, hot chakra that had poured out of him in that final desperate moment, chakra he still didn't understand and couldn't control. He swallowed his pride, just this once. Okay, Naruto said slowly. So what happens now? Kakashi allowed himself a small, genuine smile beneath his mask, the kind that reached all the way to his visible eye. Now we train. Properly this time. 6 weeks, starting today. Here's something worth pausing on for a second, because it's easy to blow past this moment if you're used to the version of this story where the Chūnin Exams start almost immediately after the Land of Waves arc. In the world you know, there's barely any breathing room between missions. Team 7 goes from near-death on a bridge straight into nomination paperwork, with no real reflection, no real reassessment, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, 3 genin who almost died deserved a little more preparation before being thrown into an exam that's historically claimed lives. That's not a criticism of the original story, it's part of what makes it compelling, honestly. Watching Naruto and Sasuke and Sakura scramble and improvise and grow under pressure they were never fully ready for. But this series exists to ask a different question. What happens when the people responsible for these kids actually stop and give them the tools they need before throwing them into the fire? We're about to find out. Kakashi gathered them around a low wooden table he'd set up near the 3 wooden training posts. The same posts where, months earlier, he'd tied Sasuke and Sakura to teach them a lesson about teamwork, back before any of them fully understood what that word meant. On the table sat a scroll, already partially unrolled, covered in notes, written in Kakashi's neat, efficient handwriting. Before we start, I want to be clear about something, Kakashi said, his tone shifting into something more serious than his usual laid-back cadence. What I saw in the Land of Waves wasn't a failure on your part. All 3 of you have more raw potential than most genin teams that come through this village. That's not flattery, it's an assessment, and I don't hand those out for free. Sakura blinked, surprised. Sasuke's expression didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders eased slightly. Naruto just grinned, unable to help himself. But Kakashi continued, holding up a hand before any of them could get too comfortable with the compliment. Potential isn't the same thing as skill. And right now, all 3 of you are relying on potential to carry you through fights that require skill. That gap is what nearly got you killed. He unrolled the scroll further, revealing 3 separate columns of notes, one for each of them. I've spent the last day thinking through exactly what each of you needs, Based on what I observed on the bridge, and what I already know about your individual strengths, Kakashi said, this isn't going to be identical training for all three of you. It's going to be specialized, built around what each of you actually has to work with. Naruto Uzumaki. Kakashi tapped the first column. Your chakra reserves are massive, larger than anything I've seen in a genin, larger than most jonin I know, if I'm being honest. But you have almost no fine control over it. That's why your clones exhaust you faster than they should, why your basic academy techniques still give you trouble, and why, in a real fight, you end up throwing raw chakra at a problem instead of using it precisely. Naruto scratched the back of his head, a little embarrassed but not exactly surprised. He'd heard some version of this criticism since his academy days. The kid who could barely manage a basic clone jutsu, who needed Mizuki's forbidden scroll in pure desperation just to pass his makeup exam. So what, you're gonna teach me control? Naruto asked. Control, and something more specific, Kakashi said. I want to test your elemental affinity properly, and depending on what we find, I have an idea for a technique that could genuinely change how you fight. But that's a conversation for later today, once we've actually run the test. Naruto's eyes lit up at the word technique, and Kakashi held up a warning finger before he could get too excited. This isn't going to be fast, and it isn't going to be easy, Kakashi said. You're going to spend a lot of time doing things that feel boring and repetitive before you see any real results. Are you prepared for that? Naruto thought about the bridge. About Sasuke's body crumpled inside a cage of ice mirrors. About how close he'd come to losing the first person who'd ever treated him like a genuine rival instead of a nuisance. Yeah, he said, and for once, there wasn't a trace of his usual bravado in the answer, just quiet, steady resolve. I'm ready, Sasuke Uchiha. Kakashi's finger moved to the second column. Your Sharingan is developing faster than I expected. You awakened it under combat stress in the Land of Waves, and it's already showing signs of a second tomo forming. That's remarkable for a genin your age. It's also dangerous, because a bloodline that develops faster than your body can support it puts strain on your chakra system that most people your age aren't equipped to handle. Sasuke's dark eyes narrowed slightly, listening intently. I also watched you attempt to keep pace with an opponent whose speed outclassed anything you'd trained against before, Kakashi continued. Your instincts are good. Your execution isn't there yet, and neither is your chakra control, which is part of why your Sharingan drains you as quickly as it does. So you're going to teach me a new technique too? Sasuke asked, and there was something careful in the way he asked it, hope, buried under years of practiced indifference. Eventually, Kakashi said, there's a technique I've been considering teaching you for a while now, one that requires precise chakra control and a fair amount of raw talent, both of which you have. But before we get there, we're going to work on the fundamentals your Sharingan needs to actually be useful in a real fight, instead of just a spectator's tool that tells you what's about to hit you half a second before it does. Sasuke absorbed this in silence, filing it away. He didn't need flattery. He needed results, a way to close the gap between where he currently stood and where his brother had already been years ago, at an age not much older than Sasuke was now. Fine, he said simply. Let's start. Patience, Kakashi said, with the faint air of someone who found the irony of that statement, coming from him of all people, quietly amusing. We'll get there. All of you will. Sakura Haruno. Kakashi's finger moved to the final column, and Sakura sat up a little straighter, notebook ready. Sakura, you have the best chakra control I've seen on a genin team in years, Kakashi said, and this time, he let the statement hang in the air for a moment, watching her expression shift from careful attentiveness to genuine surprise. Better than Sasuke's? She asked before she could stop herself, immediately looking a little embarrassed at how the question had come out. Different from Sasuke's, Kakashi said. His Sharingan gives him perceptual advantages. Yours is pure technical precision, the kind of control that takes most shinobi years to develop, and you already have the foundation for it without even realizing it. Sakura's grip on her notebook tightened. Nobody had ever told her something like that before. Not once. Every conversation about her strengths always seemed to circle back to Sasuke's talent or Naruto's stubborn determination, with her own contributions treated as an afterthought. The smart one, sure, good grades, good memory, but not exactly dangerous. The problem, Kakashi continued, is that nobody has ever taught you how to actually apply that control to anything beyond academy exercises. Walking up trees is a foundation, not a skill. I want to build on that foundation and teach you things that will make your control genuinely dangerous in a fight. Chakra-enhanced strength, precise genjutsu detection and dispelling, and eventually, some basic medical ninjutsu theory, if we have time. Sakura blinked. Medical ninjutsu? Isn't that? I mean, that's usually something Jonin-level medics specialize in, isn't it? It is, Kakashi admitted. Which is why I'm not going to be the one teaching you that particular skill. I have someone else in mind. This is a good moment to pause the story for a second and talk about something important. In the original series, Sakura Haruno spends a significant portion of the early story as the least developed member of Team 7, at least in terms of raw combat ability. It's not until much later, after training under Tsunade herself, that she becomes the powerhouse fans eventually come to respect, capable of shattering the ground with a single punch and healing catastrophic injuries with surgical precision. But what if that development didn't have to wait years? What if someone recognized her potential early, right here, before the Chūnin Exams even began? That's exactly what Kakashi was setting in motion, and it's a thread we're going to be pulling on for the rest of the series. Who did you have in mind? Naruto asked, curious despite himself. I have a few people to talk to, Kakashi said vaguely, already thinking through a mental list of contacts. Jonin-sensei he trusted, specialists he knew personally, people who might be willing to take time out of their own schedules to help train a trio of genin they had no direct obligation to. For now, all three of you need to understand something important about the next 6 weeks. He rolled up the scroll and looked at each of them in turn, his expression settling into something more serious. This isn't going to look like your academy training. It isn't going to look like the missions you've been running so far either. I'm going to push all three of you harder than I have up to this point, because the exam we're preparing for doesn't care how hard you're willing to work. It only cares whether you're actually capable of surviving it. Are you prepared for that? 3 heads nodded, Naruto's fast and eager, Sasuke's slow and deliberate, Sakura's careful but resolute. Good, Kakashi said. Then let's begin. The first order of business, before any specialized training could start, was securing proper training grounds, space large enough and remote enough for 3 genin to push their limits without drawing unwanted attention or accidentally leveling half the village in the process. Training Ground 7, familiar as it wasn't going to cut it for everything Kakashi had in mind. He requisitioned access to a secondary training area on the outskirts of the village, a wider stretch of forest and open clearing typically reserved for Jonin-level exercises, complete with a small stream running through it, sturdy trees perfect for chakra control exercises, and enough open space for taijutsu drills that required real room to move. Why do we need somewhere different? Sakura asked as they walked the perimeter of the new training ground that afternoon, taking in the unfamiliar terrain. Because some of what we're about to work on isn't exactly beginner-friendly, Kakashi said. Naruto's clone training alone is going to require space I'm not willing to risk near residential areas. And frankly, I'd rather not have an audience while all 3 of you are still figuring out the basics. Naruto puffed out his chest slightly. What, you don't think we're ready for an audience? I think, Kakashi said, with the particular dry patience of someone who had clearly had this exact conversation with overconfident students before, that the first time you attempt something new, you're going to fail. Repeatedly. And I'd rather that happen somewhere private than in front of half the village. That took some of the wind out of Naruto's sails, though not all of it. That evening, after a long day spent scouting the new training ground and running basic physical assessments, stamina tests, chakra reserve estimates, reflex drills designed to establish a baseline for each of them, Kakashi gathered his students at a small noodle stand near the edge of the market district, a quieter alternative to a chiraku that wouldn't draw quite as much attention. They sat around a low table, bowls of rice and grilled fish set in front of them, cups of hot tea steaming gently in the cool evening air. It wasn't a celebration, exactly, more of a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted between all of them, something worth marking even without fanfare. So, Sakura said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over the table, who exactly are you planning to bring in to help train us? You still haven't told us. Kakashi took a slow sip of his tea before answering. I have a few names in mind. For you, specifically, I'm thinking of reaching out to someone with a strong background in chakra-enhanced physical techniques and medical theory, someone who could actually teach you the fundamentals. I don't have the specialization to cover myself. Anyone I'd know? Sakura pressed. You'll find out soon enough, Kakashi said, deflecting with the ease of someone long practiced in giving frustratingly incomplete answers. For Sasuke, I want to bring in someone to help refine his taijutsu, someone whose speed and precision could genuinely push him past his current limits, and who has experience training students with bloodline abilities that develop rapidly. Sasuke's eyes flicked up with interest, though he said nothing. And Naruto? Kakashi's gaze shifted to his most unpredictable student. For you, I have a very specific idea in mind. But it depends on what we find during your elemental affinity test tomorrow. If I'm right about what your chakra nature turns out to be, I know exactly the technique I want to start teaching you, and exactly who might be willing to help with the specifics. Naruto leaned forward eagerly. Wait, seriously? What kind of technique? Patience, Kakashi said again. And this time all three genin groaned in unison, drawing a small, genuinely amused smile from their sensei, the first real smile any of them had seen from him since before the mission to the Land of Waves. Word travels fast in a village full of shinobi, and it didn't take long for the rest of the rookie genin teams to notice that Team 7 was conspicuously absent from the growing buzz surrounding Chūnin Exam nominations. The next morning, as Naruto made his way toward the market to grab a quick meal before training, he ran into Kiba Inuzuka, Akamaru trotting along at his heels, tail wagging. Hey Naruto! Kiba called out, jogging over. You guys signing up for the exams too, right? Heard almost every rookie team is putting their names in this cycle. Naruto hesitated, suddenly aware of exactly how strange his answer was going to sound. Yeah, about that, we're not signing up. Not this time, anyway. Kiba blinked, clearly caught off guard. Wait, seriously? Why not? You guys did that mission to Wave Country, right? I heard it turned into some huge fight. It did, Naruto said, and for a moment some of his usual boastfulness threatened to take over. The urge to spin the story into something impressive, something that made him sound stronger than he actually felt in that moment. But he caught himself, thinking about the ice mirrors, about Sasuke nearly dying, about how close all of them had come to a very different outcome. Kakashi-sensei thinks we need more training before we're ready, Naruto said instead, the honesty feeling strange in his mouth but not entirely unwelcome. So we're taking some time before the next exam cycle. Kiba looked at him for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. When it became clear it wasn't, his expression shifted into something more thoughtful. Huh. That's actually kind of smart, I guess. Guy-sensei's always saying something about how youthful ambition without proper foundation is just asking for trouble, or whatever. Please don't start quoting Guy-sensei at me, Naruto said, grimacing, and Kiba laughed, the tension breaking. Well, good luck I guess, Kiba said, whistling for Akamaru as he turned to head off toward his own team's meeting point. See you next cycle then. Try not to get too far ahead of us. Naruto watched him go, a strange mix of embarrassment and determination settling in his chest. Other rookie teams were moving forward without them. It would have been easy to let that sting, to let his pride flare up and demand they push forward too, exam ready or not. But he thought about the technique Kakashi had hinted at. About wind chakra, about whatever secret was waiting for him at the training ground later that morning, about the promise he'd made himself on the boat ride home from Wave Country. No more relying on luck. Let them get ahead, Naruto thought, jogging off toward the training ground with new determination in his step. When we finally show up to that exam, nobody's gonna know what hit them. Word reached Sasuke in a different way entirely, through a brief, pointed conversation with his old academy classmate, Sakura's rival for his attention in years past, Ino Yamanaka, who cornered him near the training grounds that same morning with her usual mix of curiosity and barely concealed concern. So it's true, Ino said, arms crossed, studying him carefully. You guys really aren't signing up for the exams this time? Not yet, Sasuke said simply, not particularly interested in elaborating further. That's so unlike you, Ino pressed. I figured you'd want to prove yourself as fast as possible, especially with Naruto in your ear all the time about who's stronger. Sasuke was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer without revealing more than he wanted to. I almost died in the land of waves, he said finally, bluntly, watching Ino's expression shift from teasing curiosity to genuine surprise. I'd rather actually be ready next time than rush in unprepared again. Ino blinked, clearly not having expected that level of honesty from him. Oh. I didn't realize it was that serious. It was, Sasuke said, and something in his tone closed the conversation as effectively as a door swinging shut. Ino studied him for a moment longer, then, uncharacteristically softened. Well, good luck then. Whatever training you guys are doing. Just don't get too far behind the rest of us, Uchiha. Sasuke almost smiled at that. Almost. Don't worry about that, he said, turning to head toward the training ground, already thinking about the Sharingan drills waiting for him that morning. Worry about catching up. By the third day, the new training ground had become something of a second home for Team 7. Kakashi arrived each morning, genuinely on time, a habit that continued to unsettle all three of his students in ways they couldn't quite articulate, with a fresh set of drills, adjustments, and observations based on the previous day's progress. The elemental affinity test, conducted using a specialized piece of chakra paper that reacted differently depending on a person's natural chakra nature, had revealed exactly what Kakashi suspected. Naruto's chakra nature leaned strongly toward wind, a rare and difficult affinity that, combined with his massive reserves, opened up possibilities Kakashi was eager to start exploring. Sasuke's affinity test confirmed fire, unsurprising given the Uchiha clan's long history with fire-nature techniques, though Kakashi noted with interest that there was a faint secondary reaction as well, something worth investigating further, though not an immediate priority. Sakura's test revealed a balanced, flexible chakra nature without a strong single affinity, which, rather than being a weakness, Kakashi explained, actually made her an excellent candidate for the kind of precise, technical chakra control training he had planned for her, unrestricted by needing to specialize too narrowly. Think of it this way, Kakashi told her, as they stood at the edge of the training ground on the fourth morning, watching Naruto attempt, and fail, repeatedly, to split a leaf using pure wind chakra manipulation in the distance. A strong single affinity gives you power in one direction. A flexible, balanced nature gives you versatility. Given what I have planned for your training, versatility is going to serve you far better. Sakura nodded, taking careful notes, already turning over the theoretical implications in her mind. That night, as the sun set behind the Hokage monument, casting long shadows across the village, Kakashi sat alone in his apartment, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside him, several scrolls spread out in front of him, contact information for former colleagues, old training notes from his own childhood, careful lists of techniques suited to each of his students' developing strengths. He thought about the promise he'd made to the Hokage. 6 weeks. It wasn't much time, not really, not when measured against the kind of transformation he was hoping to achieve. But it was more time than any of them would have had otherwise, and Kakashi intended to make every single day of it count. He picked up a blank scroll and began drafting a letter, a request for assistance, addressed to someone he hadn't spoken with in quite some time, someone whose particular skill set was exactly what Sakura needed to truly unlock her potential. He also began drafting a second letter, this one addressed to a taijutsu specialist known throughout the village for pushing students past what they believed were their absolute limits, someone whose intense, demanding training style might be exactly what Sasuke needed to refine the raw talent simmering beneath his still-developing Sharingan. And for Naruto, Kakashi paused, setting down his brush for a moment, thinking carefully about the technique he had in mind. It was ambitious. Dangerously so, for a genin barely past his academy years. But if anyone had the chakra reserves to even attempt it, it was Naruto Uzumaki. A technique that took the fourth Hokage years to perfect, Kakashi thought, staring at the blank scroll in front of him. Let's see if his son can master even a fraction of it in 6 weeks. It was a thought that carried more weight than Kakashi allowed himself to dwell on for too long. Some secrets weren't his to share yet, not until the time was right. He picked his brush back up and continued writing. As the first week of training drew to a close, something had already begun to shift among the 3 genin of Team 7, not dramatic, not obvious to any casual observer, but real all the same. Naruto's clones, once wild and uncoordinated, were beginning to move with a touch more precision. Sasuke's Sharingan, once a source of strain and exhaustion, was starting to feel slightly more natural to activate and hold, even if actually using it effectively in combat remained a distant goal. And Sakura, working through a series of increasingly advanced chakra control exercises, had begun to notice something remarkable happening in her own hands, a faint, controlled surge of enhanced strength she hadn't known she was capable of producing. None of them were anywhere near ready for the Chūnin Exams yet. Not by a long shot. But for the first time since the mission to the Land of Waves, all three of them were beginning to feel something they hadn't felt in weeks. Confidence. Real confidence, built on actual growth rather than desperate hope. That confidence was put to an unexpected test on the 6th day, when Kakashi arrived at the training ground not alone, but flanked by two figures Team 7 hadn't been expecting, a woman with sharp red eyes and an air of quiet intensity, and a green-clad Chūnin whose booming voice could be heard echoing across the training ground before he'd even fully come into view. Team 7! The green-clad Chūnin bellowed, striking a dramatic pose with an enthusiasm that made Naruto immediately take a wary step backward. I have heard about your youthful dedication to proper training before rushing headlong into danger, and I must say, it fills this old heart with the fires of inspiration. Sasuke stared, visibly questioning several of his recent life choices. Kakashi, entirely unbothered, gestured between his students and the two newcomers. Team 7, I'd like you to meet the instructors I mentioned. They've agreed to help with your training over the next several weeks. Sakura's eyes widened as she recognized the woman standing beside the boisterous Chūnin, someone whose reputation for genjutsu mastery and razor-sharp perception preceded her throughout the village. This, Kakashi continued, is going to be where things really start to change. You already know the numbers, even if you've never seen them written down. Naruto Uzumaki has more chakra than almost anyone his age, more, honestly, than most fully trained Chūnin walking the streets of Konoha. It's part of what makes him who he is. It's also part of what makes him so dangerous to himself. In the story you know, that chakra mostly manifests as brute force, endless shadow clones thrown at a problem until something sticks, desperate bursts of power pulled from somewhere dark and red when he's backed into a corner. It works, more often than it probably should. But it's inefficient. Wasteful. The kind of strength that burns through itself long before it reaches its actual ceiling. Kakashi Hatake had spent 6 days watching that inefficiency up close, and on the morning of the 7th day, he decided it was time to start fixing it. All right, Kakashi said, standing in the middle of the training ground with a stack of paper in one hand. Not scrolls, not weapons, just ordinary-looking squares of pale green paper. Today, we're talking about chakra nature. Naruto squinted at the paper. That's it. That's what we've been building up to all week. Patience, Kakashi said for what felt like the 100th time that week. He held up one of the squares. This is chakra paper. It's specially treated. When you channel chakra into it, it reacts differently depending on your natural affinity. Wet, it means water. Crumples, it's lightning. Splits in half, wind. Burns, fire. Turns to dirt, earth. And you already know I'm wind, right? You said something about that when we were talking to Lord Hokage. Naruto caught himself, realizing he hadn't actually been in the room for that conversation, and hadn't actually been told the outcome of his own affinity test from earlier that week. I ran a preliminary test 3 days ago while you were busy with guys' warm-up drills, Kakashi confirmed. It confirmed what I suspected. You have a strong wind affinity. Wind, huh? Naruto frowned, turning the concept over. Isn't that supposed to be, like, one of the hardest ones? I remember Irika-sensei mentioning that in class once. It's considered one of the more difficult natures to master, yes, Kakashi said. Wind chakra is sharp, precise, and unforgiving if you don't have the control to shape it properly. Most shinobi with a wind affinity spend years developing techniques around it. Naruto's face fell slightly. So it's gonna take forever. For most people, Kakashi agreed. But you're not most people. You have chakra reserves large enough to fail at something 100 times in a row and still have enough left over to try in our first attempt. That's an advantage almost nobody else in this village has. That got Naruto's attention again, his expression brightening. So here's what we're going to do, Kakashi continued, crouching down to Naruto's eye level. I'm going to teach you a training method that takes advantage of exactly that strength. And I want you to understand, this isn't a shortcut. It's still going to take real effort. But it's going to let you cover ground most genins simply can't. What kind of method? Kakashi's visible eye crinkled into that familiar upside-down smile. How many shadow clones can you make at once, would you say? Realistically, Naruto blinked, caught off guard by the question. I dunno. A lot. More than anybody else I've ever seen try it, probably. That's kinda the one thing I've always been able to do, even when I couldn't do anything else right. That's exactly what I thought, Kakashi said. Do you know why the shadow clone technique is classified as a forbidden technique in most villages, even though it seems like a fairly simple application of clone theory? Naruto shook his head slowly. Because it's an enormous chakra drain. Each clone requires roughly the same chakra as the user's actual body. Most shinobi can create one, maybe two before they're running on empty. It's simply too expensive for regular use. Kakashi paused deliberately. There's a second reason it's rarely used for anything beyond combat and reconnaissance, though. One that most people don't fully appreciate. What's that? When a shadow clone dispels, Kakashi said, any experience it gained while it existed, anything it learned, any technique it practiced, any memory it formed, transfers back to the original. Naruto stared at him. It took a second for the implication to fully land. Wait. His eyes went wide. Wait, so if I make 100 clones, and they all go practice something at the same time, and then they all disappear, you'd effectively gain 100 practice sessions worth of experience, compressed into the time it took your clones to work, Kakashi confirmed. In theory. In practice, it's more complicated than that. The mental strain of absorbing that much simultaneous experience can be disorienting, even dangerous, if you're not careful about how much you attempt at once. Most shinobi with the chakra capacity to try this never bother, because they simply don't have enough reserves to make it worthwhile. Naruto was practically vibrating where he stood. But I do. You do, Kakashi agreed. Which means, theoretically, you have access to one of the single most powerful training methods in existence. And up until this exact moment, you've been using it almost exclusively to prank Chūnin proctors and cause chaos in the marketplace. Naruto had the decency to look slightly sheepish at that. So, Kakashi said, standing back up and dusting off his knees, here's what we're going to do with the next several weeks. We're going to teach you how to shape wind chakra, a difficult, precise skill that would normally take a genin years to even begin approaching. And we're going to use your clones to compress that timeline into something far more manageable. They started simple, deceptively simple, in the way that the fundamentals of any difficult skill often are. Kakashi handed Naruto a single leaf, plucked from a nearby tree. Before you can shape wind chakra into anything useful, you need to understand what it actually feels like to control it with precision. This exercise is going to seem boring. It's going to seem beneath you. I promise you it isn't. What do I do with it? Hold the leaf between two fingers, Kakashi instructed. Channel a small, controlled amount of wind-natured chakra into it, with the goal of cutting it cleanly in half, not tearing it, not shredding it, cutting it. Clean, precise, controlled. Naruto took the leaf, held it up, and channeled chakra into it exactly the way he channeled chakra into everything else, with enthusiasm and roughly zero precision. The leaf disintegrated entirely, crumbling into a shower of green fragments that drifted down onto the grass. Kakashi didn't even blink. As expected. Try again. Naruto tried again. And again. And again, the leaves disintegrating, crumbling, occasionally scorching slightly at the edges from stray bursts of chakra he couldn't quite contain, but never once splitting cleanly in the way Kakashi had described. After the 20th attempt, Naruto threw up his hands in frustration. This is impossible. How is anybody supposed to control it that precisely? Most people can't, not without years of practice, Kakashi said calmly, handing him another leaf. Which is exactly why we're not going to rely on you alone to get through those years of practice. Naruto blinked, and then understanding dawned across his face. The clones, Kakashi confirmed. Go ahead. How many do you think you can sustain while still doing your own individual training alongside them? Naruto thought about it, actually thought about it, rather than just throwing out an impulsive guess, which was, in its own small way, Evidence of exactly the kind of growth Kakashi had been hoping to see since the Land of Waves. I dunno, maybe 50? 100, if I really push it? Start with 50, Kakashi said. We'll build up from there once I'm confident you can handle the mental strain of the memories flooding back all at once. 50 shadow clones appeared in a cloud of smoke and displaced air, filling the training ground with an army of identical, orange-clad genin, all wearing the exact same expression of stubborn determination. All right, Naruto said, addressing his clones with an authority that would have looked almost comical if the stakes hadn't been so genuinely significant. You heard sensei. Leaf cutting, wind chakra, precision, not just blasting it like an idiot. Everybody spread out and get to work. The clones dispersed across the training ground, each one plucking a leaf from the surrounding trees, each one attempting the exact same exercise with the exact same lack of finesse the original had displayed moments earlier. Kakashi watched with quiet interest as 50 identical failures played out simultaneously across the clearing, leaves disintegrating, chakra spilling out in wild, uncontrolled bursts. The same mistake repeated over and over in 50 different bodies at once. This is gonna take forever, Naruto muttered, watching his clones fail in perfect, frustrating unison. Give it time, Kakashi said. Watch. Here's something worth explaining for anyone who hasn't spent as much time thinking about shadow clone theory as, say, a certain silver-haired jonin who happened to grow up idolizing the man who invented practical applications for it in the first place. The real power of this training method isn't that it makes any individual attempt more likely to succeed. It's that it removes the single biggest bottleneck in learning any physical skill, time, and the sheer number of repetitions required before muscle memory and chakra sense finally click into place. A normal genin practicing that leaf-cutting exercise alone might manage 20, maybe 30 attempts in an hour before mental and physical fatigue started degrading the quality of each subsequent try. Naruto, with 50 clones working simultaneously, was effectively running 50 parallel training sessions at once. 50 times the repetitions, in the same stretch of time it would have taken him to attempt the exercise alone. It didn't matter that each individual clone was still failing. What mattered was the sheer accumulated volume of failure, and eventually, the flickers of success buried somewhere inside all of it. It happened on the third hour, from a clone standing near the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shade of an overhanging branch. The leaf split. Cleanly. Precisely. Right down the center vein, with none of the ragged disintegration that had characterized every single attempt up until that moment. The clone stared down at the two halves of the leaf sitting in his palm, and for a moment, simply blinked in stunned disbelief. Boss! Boss, I did it! I actually did it! Every other clone in the clearing turned to look, and Naruto, the original, standing near the center of the training ground, felt something strange ripple through him even before the successful clone dispelled itself in a small puff of smoke. The memory hit him all at once. Not gradually, not like remembering something from earlier in the day, but instantaneous and complete. The exact sensation of chakra control that had produced that clean, precise cut. The specific feel of the chakra flow, the precise moment of release, the particular tension and relaxation in the fingers that had made the difference between disintegration and a clean cut. Naruto's eyes went wide. Whoa, something happened? Kakashi asked, though the faint knowing smile beneath his mask suggested he already knew exactly what had happened. Naruto held up a hand, staring at his own fingers like they belonged to someone else. I think I get it now. I think I actually get it. He plucked another leaf from a nearby branch, held it up, and channeled chakra into it with a careful, deliberate focus that hadn't been present in any of his own earlier attempts. The leaf split cleanly in half. Naruto stared at the two pieces in stunned silence for a long moment, and then let out a whoop of pure, unfiltered joy that echoed across the training ground and sent a flock of birds scattering from a nearby tree. I did it! Kakashi-sensei, look, I actually did it! Kakashi allowed himself a genuine smile, no longer bothering to hide it beneath the usual mask of lazy indifference. You did. And that's exactly the point I wanted you to understand today. What point? That your chakra reserves aren't just a party trick for making a lot of clones, Kakashi said. They're a genuine advantage, one that, used correctly, lets you compress years of training into weeks. What just happened wasn't luck. It was the direct result of 50 simultaneous learning attempts, all funneling their combined experience back into you at once. Naruto looked down at the leaf in his hands, something settling into place behind his eyes, a quiet, dawning understanding of exactly how much untapped potential he'd been sitting on this entire time, completely unaware. Okay, Naruto said slowly, a fierce grin spreading across his face. Okay, so what's next? What else can I do with this? Kakashi's smile widened slightly beneath his mask. Funny you should ask. Over the following days, Naruto's training accelerated at a pace that even Kakashi hadn't fully anticipated. Once the fundamental principle clicked, the understanding of what precise, controlled chakra actually felt like, as opposed to the raw, undisciplined burst he'd relied on his entire life. Subsequent exercises came together with startling speed. He moved from cutting individual leaves to cutting multiple leaves simultaneously, refining his control until he could manage the technique with a consistency that would have impressed shinobi twice his age. He practiced shaping wind chakra around kunai, sharpening their edges and extending their reach in small, controlled bursts. He worked on channeling wind chakra into his footwork, using it to add explosive bursts of speed to his movements, an early, rough application of a technique Kakashi hinted might one day evolve into something far more refined. Through all of it, the shadow clones remained his single greatest tool, not a shortcut, exactly, but a genuine multiplier that let him fail faster, learn faster, and adjust faster than any traditional training method could have allowed. You know, Kakashi said one afternoon, watching Naruto direct another wave of clones through an increasingly complex series of chakra control drills. I don't think I've ever seen anyone learn this quickly, not without significant natural talent to begin with. You think I've got natural talent? Naruto asked, grinning. I think, Kakashi said carefully, that you've spent your entire life being told you're behind everyone else, and it's convinced you to believe something that was never actually true. You're not naturally gifted the way Sasuke is with his bloodline, no. But you have something arguably more valuable, the raw chakra capacity to simply outwork everyone around you, if you're willing to put in the effort. Naruto was quiet for a moment, turning that over. It wasn't the kind of praise he was used to hearing, not the flashy, obvious kind of talent everyone recognized in Sasuke at a glance, but something quieter, something that had been sitting inside him this entire time, waiting for someone to actually take the time to unlock it. I'm gonna prove that's true, Naruto said finally, quiet determination replacing his usual boisterous energy. Not just to everybody else. To myself, too. Kakashi nodded, something like genuine pride flickering behind his visible eye. I believe you. It was on the 10th day of training, roughly the midpoint of the first phase Kakashi had planned, that things took an unexpected turn. Naruto had taken to using his clones not just for combat drills, but for research as well, dispatching several of them each morning to the village's public archive to study chakra theory, elemental technique scrolls, and anything else that might accelerate his understanding of wind-natured jutsu. It wasn't glamorous work, hours spent poring over dense, technical scrolls in a quiet corner of the archive, but the shadow clone multiplier made even tedious research feel manageable, each clone absorbing information that would flow back to the original the moment they dispelled. One particular afternoon, a clone stationed in a less frequented section of the archive, an area holding older, partially restricted records from several decades back, technically accessible to Genin only with specific research permissions Kakashi had arranged in advance, came across a scroll tucked away in a dusty corner, its edges worn and slightly yellowed with age. The clone paused, curiosity getting the better of him, and carefully unrolled it. The handwriting was neat, precise, methodical, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who valued efficiency and clarity above all else. And at the top of the scroll, faded but still legible, was a title that made even the clone's breath catch. Preliminary notes, A-rank original technique, Wind Nature Shape Manipulation, incomplete. The clone's eyes scanned further down the scroll, taking in fragments of diagrams, a swirling, spiraling shape rendered in careful ink, notes about chakra rotation, about the difference between simply releasing chakra outward and actively shaping it into a contained, rotating sphere of destructive force. Most of the scroll was incomplete. Entire sections had clearly been left unfinished, notes trailing off mid-sentence, diagrams abandoned before they were ever fully realized. But what remained was enough to make the clone's pulse quicken with something that felt distinctly like recognition. even though he couldn't have explained why. There was no name signed anywhere on the scroll. No indication of who had written it, or why it had been left unfinished, tucked away in a rarely visited corner of the archive for what looked like well over a decade. But something about it, the precision of the diagrams, the ambitious, almost reckless scope of what the technique seemed to be attempting to achieve, felt significant in a way the clone couldn't quite put into words. He carefully rolled the scroll back up, tucked it under his arm, and headed straight for the training ground, dispelling himself the moment he stepped outside the archive doors. The memory hit Naruto like a physical jolt, right in the middle of a taijutsu drill with one of his other clones. He staggered slightly, one hand flying up to his temple, and Kakashi, always watchful, even when appearing distracted, was at his side in an instant. "Naruto? What happened?" Naruto blinked rapidly, trying to process the flood of information that had just arrived. "One of my clones found something. In the archive. A scroll, some kind of unfinished technique, wind nature, something about shaping chakra into a sphere." Kakashi went very still. "Describe it," he said, his voice carrying an intensity that hadn't been present a moment earlier. Naruto did his best, describing the diagrams as he remembered them through the fractured, second-hand nature of the clone's memory, the spiraling shape, the notes about rotation, the incomplete, abandoned quality of the whole thing. Kakashi was quiet for a long moment, and something complicated passed behind his visible eye. Recognition, and something that might have been grief, carefully controlled. "Naruto," he said finally, "I think I know what your clone found." "What is it?" Kakashi hesitated, weighing exactly how much to say. This wasn't a conversation he'd planned to have this early. Not until he was certain the timing was right, not until he'd had a chance to think through the implications carefully. But Naruto was staring up at him with wide, expectant eyes, and some part of Kakashi recognized that the moment had arrived whether he was fully ready for it or not. "There was a shinobi in this village once," Kakashi said carefully, "who spent years developing an original technique, one so difficult, so ambitious, that he never fully completed it in the way he originally intended. What you're describing sounds like it could be an early draft of that technique's foundational theory." Naruto's breath caught. "Who was it? Who came up with it?" Kakashi was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "Someone very important to this village," he said finally, deliberately vague. "Someone whose work I think you might be uniquely suited to finish, if you're willing to put in the effort it deserves." Naruto stared at him, 1,000 questions bubbling up behind his eyes, but something in Kakashi's expression told him this wasn't the moment to push for all the answers at once. "Can you teach it to me?" Naruto asked instead, settling on the question that mattered most. "This technique, can you teach me how to actually finish it?" Kakashi looked at his student for a long moment. This boy who had spent his entire life being underestimated, dismissed, treated as less than he actually was by a village that saw only what it expected to see rather than what was actually standing in front of them. "It's going to be difficult," Kakashi said finally. "More difficult than anything else we've worked on so far. The technique this scroll is referencing requires an extraordinary level of chakra control, shape manipulation, and raw chakra capacity. Capacity that very few shinobi in this village's history have possessed." "I've got chakra to spare," Naruto said immediately, grinning despite the gravity of the moment. "You said so yourself?" Kakashi couldn't quite suppress a small, genuine laugh. "That you do? All right. If you're serious about this, I want to bring the actual scroll back here so I can review it properly. And there's someone else I think should be involved in teaching you this. Someone with far more direct experience with the fundamentals than I have." "Who?" Kakashi's expression turned thoughtful, already running through the logistics of sending a message, of reaching out to someone he hadn't spoken with directly in some time, a certain white-haired, perpetually absent sage with a habit of disappearing for research purposes that were rarely as scholarly as he claimed. "Someone who knew the person who started this technique better than almost anyone else alive," Kakashi said. "Give me a few days. I need to send a message and see if he's actually reachable." That evening, back in his small apartment, Kakashi sat with the recovered scroll spread out on his table, studying the faded diagrams with an intensity that had nothing to do with idle curiosity. He'd recognized the handwriting the moment Naruto described it to him, recognized it in the careful, methodical precision of the notes, in the particular way certain characters were formed, habits so deeply familiar they'd been burned into Kakashi's memory since childhood. Minato-sensei. Kakashi traced a finger lightly over the incomplete diagram, the spiraling shape that represented years of careful, ambitious theoretical work, abandoned unfinished when its creator's life had been cut tragically short, sealed away inside his own son without ever getting the chance to pass the knowledge on directly. There was a bittersweet symmetry to it that Kakashi couldn't quite ignore. The son, completely unaware of his father's identity, stumbling by pure chance onto a fragment of his father's greatest unfinished work, drawn to it by some instinct neither of them could fully explain. Kakashi thought about the promise he made himself, years ago, standing at the memorial stone with the names of everyone he'd failed to protect carved into cold stone. He thought about Minato's final wish, not spoken directly to Kakashi, not in so many words, but understood all the same, in the quiet trust of a man who had sealed part of himself into his infant son and hoped, against everything, that the village would treat that son with the respect and care he deserved. I can't tell him yet, Kakashi thought, carefully rolling the scroll back up. Not until the timing is right. But I can give him this. I can give him the tools to finish what you started, sensei. He set the scroll aside and began drafting a letter, brief, urgent, addressed to a contact whose current whereabouts were, as usual, entirely unpredictable. I need your help with something important. Naruto has found the beginnings of a very particular technique, one I think you'll recognize immediately. Come to Konoha as soon as you're able. This can't wait. 3 days later, Naruto stood in the training ground, staring at a slightly deflated water balloon Kakashi had handed him, feeling more confused than he had at almost any point since this training had begun. A water balloon, Naruto said flatly. You want me to do something with a water balloon? I want you to pop it, Kakashi said, using nothing but controlled chakra release from your palm, without touching it against anything else. No throwing it. No squeezing it by hand. Chakra control, precise release, contained entirely within the balloon itself. Naruto turned the balloon over in his hands, feeling distinctly like he was missing some larger piece of context. This is about that scroll thing, isn't it? The wind sphere technique? It's the first real step toward it, Kakashi confirmed. Before you can attempt actual shape manipulation on the scale that technique requires, you need to understand containment, how to hold rotating chakra inside a controlled space without letting it explode outward the way it wants to. And a water balloon teaches me that how, exactly? Because a water balloon punishes imprecision immediately and obviously, Kakashi said. Too much chakra, released too roughly, and it simply pops from the outside pressure. That's easy, that's what you'd expect. But the goal here is to make it burst from carefully controlled internal rotation, chakra spinning inside the balloon with enough contained force to rupture it from within, rather than through brute external pressure. Naruto stared down at the innocent-looking water balloon in his palm, suddenly understanding exactly how difficult this next stage of training was about to be. This is gonna take forever, isn't it? He said, not quite a question. Probably, Kakashi agreed, with the particular calm of someone who had clearly expected this reaction. Which is exactly why you're going to want your clones for this one too. Get started. I'll be back to check on your progress in a few hours. I have a letter to send, and hopefully, soon, some additional help arriving to make sure you're actually learning this correctly. Naruto watched him go, then looked down at the water balloon in his hand, summoning a dozen shadow clones with a familiar cross-shaped hand sign. Alright, he told the assembled clones, holding up his own water balloon like a training weapon. You heard the man. Let's figure this out. Behind him, unnoticed in the growing pile of failed, unpopped, and occasionally accidentally thrown water balloons littering the training ground, something significant was quietly taking shape, the very first fumbling steps toward a technique that would, in time, become one of the most recognizable and devastating in the entire shinobi world. Naruto Uzumaki had no idea, in that moment, exactly whose legacy he was reaching toward. He just knew that for the first time in his life, someone had handed him a piece of real, tangible potential, and he had absolutely no intention of letting it slip through his fingers. If you've been paying attention to this series, you already remember the moment from Chapter 2, Kakashi Hatake arriving at the training ground flanked by two unexpected instructors. One of them a green-clad jonin whose booming voice and dramatic proclamations about the fires of youth had made even Sasuke, notoriously difficult to rattle, take an involuntary step backward. That Jonin's name was Might Guy, and over the following days, Sasuke Uchiha would come to understand exactly why Kakashi had chosen him. "Alright," Kakashi said, standing at the edge of the training ground on the morning of the 8th day, Guy standing beside him with an expression of barely contained enthusiasm. "Sasuke, I want to talk to you about something important before we get started today." Sasuke crossed his arms, waiting. "Your Sharingan," Kakashi continued, "is developing at a pace that honestly surprises me. You awakened it under combat stress against Haku, which is remarkable on its own. Most Uchiha don't awaken their bloodline until they've experienced something significantly more traumatic, and even then, it usually takes years of additional development before a second tomo forms. So what's the problem?" Sasuke asked. He could hear the "but" coming before Kakashi even said it. "The problem," Kakashi said, "is that your body hasn't caught up to your eyes yet. A Sharingan capable of tracking movement at the speed yours is developing toward requires reflexes, muscle memory, and stamina to actually act on what it perceives. Right now, you can see an attack coming and still not be fast enough to avoid it. That gap very nearly killed you on that bridge." Sasuke's jaw tightened, the memory of Haku's Senbon raining down around him, faster than he could track even with his awakened eyes, resurfacing with uncomfortable clarity. "That's where I come in," Guy declared, striking a pose that involved considerably more dramatic flair than the moment strictly called for. "Kakashi has told me of your situation, young Sasuke, and I intend to close that gap between your perception and your body through the most time-tested method known to shinobi kind, rigorous, unrelenting taijutsu training." Sasuke eyed him warily. "Right. Do not let his enthusiasm fool you," Kakashi said, a faint note of amusement in his voice. "Guy is, without exaggeration, one of the finest taijutsu specialists in this village. His speed rivals my own, and in close combat, he's pushed me to my limits more than once." That got Sasuke's attention properly. He studied Guy with fresh scrutiny, the thick eyebrows, the bowl-cut hair, the green jumpsuit that seemed almost deliberately designed to be taken less seriously than its wearer deserved. "I trained an academy student named Rock Lee," Guy continued, his tone shifting into something more genuinely focused, the theatrical bravado momentarily set aside. "A boy without any bloodline advantages whatsoever, who has, through pure hard work and dedication, developed taijutsu skills that rival shinobi with far greater natural gifts. I understand the value of raw talent, Sasuke Uchiha, but I understand even better the value of talent married to discipline. You have the former in abundance. Today, we begin building the latter." Something in the sincerity of that statement cut through Sasuke's initial skepticism. He'd spent his entire life being told he was gifted, that his bloodline made him special, that greatness was simply his birthright as an Uchiha. Nobody had ever quite framed it the way Guy just had, as something that still needed to be built, regardless of how much natural potential he started with. "Fine," Sasuke said. "Let's start." Guy's face split into an enormous, blindingly enthusiastic grin. "Excellent. Let the training begin." The first several days of taijutsu training with Guy were, in Sasuke's private assessment, some of the most physically demanding of his entire life, which was saying something, given the rigor of the Uchiha clan's own historical training methods Sasuke had absorbed second-hand through his brother's old notes, and the fragmented memories of a childhood spent watching Itachi train. Guy didn't just teach techniques. He rebuilt fundamentals from the ground up: stance, balance, footwork, the precise mechanics of how force traveled through a body during a strike, the difference between raw speed and controlled speed, between reacting to an opponent's movement and anticipating it before it fully began. "Your Sharingan," Guy explained one morning, as Sasuke worked through a grueling series of reflex drills, dodging a barrage of blunted training kunai thrown at increasing speed and unpredictability, "gives you an advantage almost nobody else possesses, the ability to perceive an opponent's movement with exceptional clarity. But perception without the physical capacity to act on it is like owning a map to a village you have no legs to walk to." Sasuke ducked beneath a kunai, feeling the wind of its passage brush against his hair, and rolled sideways to avoid a second one thrown immediately after. His Sharingan, active and spinning with its single fully formed tomo, tracked both projectiles with startling clarity, and yet his body, still adjusting to that heightened perception, moved a fraction of a second slower than it needed to. A third kunai clipped his shoulder, not enough to draw blood through his jacket, but enough to sting. You saw that one coming, Guy observed, not unkindly. Your eyes told your body exactly what was about to happen, but your body hasn't learned to trust that information yet, hasn't learned to move the instant your eyes register the threat, rather than a half-second later, once your conscious mind has caught up. Sasuke straightened, rubbing his shoulder, frustration simmering beneath his controlled exterior. So how do I fix that? Repetition, Guy said simply. Thousands of repetitions, until the connection between what your eyes perceive and what your body does becomes instinct rather than conscious thought. There is no shortcut for this, Sasuke Uchiha. Only dedication. Sasuke thought, briefly, of Naruto's shadow clones, of the rumors already spreading through the training ground about how quickly his teammates' control had improved through sheer repetition compressed into a fraction of the normal time. A flicker of something competitive sparked in his chest. If he can find a shortcut through sheer volume, I'll close the gap through precision, Sasuke thought. Either way, I'm not falling behind. Again, Sasuke said out loud, resetting into his stance. Guy's grin widened. That's the spirit. Again, here's something worth sitting with for a moment, because it's easy to overlook if you're not paying close attention to the dynamics at play. In the story you already know, Sasuke Uchiha's rivalry with Naruto is often framed as something almost entirely negative, a source of arrogance, of dismissiveness, of a gap between the two of them that Sasuke rarely acknowledges out loud even when it's painfully obvious. But underneath that surface-level dismissiveness has always been something more complicated. Naruto is the first person Sasuke's own age who has ever refused to simply accept his own inferiority as fixed and permanent. Every time Naruto closes a gap that should, by all reasonable measures, be impossible to close, it forces Sasuke to reckon with a question he doesn't like sitting with. If someone with no bloodline, no clan prestige, no natural gifts can claw his way towards strength through pure stubbornness, what excuse does Sasuke have for falling short? In this version of events, with both of them training in parallel, pushing each other without ever directly training together, that dynamic was only intensifying. By the second week, Sasuke's taijutsu had visibly sharpened, not into anything resembling Guy's own legendary speed, not yet, but enough that Kakashi noted the improvement with quiet approval during a brief check-in session. Good, Kakashi said, watching Sasuke work through a combination drill with noticeably improved fluidity, his movements finally beginning to synchronize with what his Sharingan was perceiving in real time. You're ready for the next phase. Sasuke straightened, breathing hard from the drill, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. What phase? Kakashi's expression shifted, taking on a more deliberate weight. I want to teach you a technique, one that requires the exact combination of skills you've been developing, precise chakra control, sharp reflexes, and the kind of focus your Sharingan is beginning to provide. Something in Sasuke's chest tightened with anticipation. What kind of technique? Kakashi held up his right hand, chakra beginning to gather and crackle around his fingers, a low, sharp sound like distant thunder building in his palm. It's called Chidori, Kakashi said. 1,000 birds. I developed it myself years ago, and it remains one of the most dangerous techniques I know, an assassination technique built around concentrating a massive amount of lightning-natured chakra into a single, focused point, generating enough cutting power to pierce through nearly anything in its path. Sasuke stared at the crackling chakra gathering in Kakashi's palm, transfixed. It's also, Kakashi continued, his tone turning serious in a way that demanded Sasuke's full attention, an incredibly dangerous technique to use, and an even more dangerous one to learn incorrectly. The speed and power required to execute it properly leaves almost no margin for error. Used improperly, it can seriously injure, even kill, the user before it ever reaches an opponent. Then why teach it to me? Sasuke asked, though the question wasn't a challenge. It was genuine curiosity, mixed with something that might have been the first real flicker of trust he'd shown Kakashi since they'd become a team. Kakashi considered the question carefully before answering. Because your affinity test showed a fire-natured chakra with a secondary lightning reaction, a rare combination, and one that suggests real aptitude for this particular technique. And because I watched you on that bridge, staring down an opponent whose speed outclassed anything you trained against, and I saw someone who needs a technique capable of ending a fight decisively, before an enemy has the chance to overwhelm you the way Haku nearly did. The memory of the ice mirrors flashed behind Sasuke's eyes, the helplessness, the humiliation of being trapped, unable to do anything except watch Saban rain down around him. "Teach me," Sasuke said, and there was no hesitation in his voice at all. The theory behind Chidori, as Kakashi explained it over the following days, was deceptively simple to describe and monstrously difficult to execute. At its core, Kakashi said, demonstrating slowly, chakra gathering and crackling in his palm with controlled precision, it's about concentrating lightning-natured chakra into an extremely dense, focused point, then channeling it forward with enough speed that the resulting technique can pierce through flesh, bone, and in some cases, even certain defensive techniques. How fast does it need to be? Sasuke asked, watching the crackling chakra with intense focus. Fast enough that most opponents won't have time to properly react once you commit to the attack, Kakashi said. Which is precisely why it's so dangerous. Once you begin the technique, you're moving at a speed that leaves very little room to adjust course or defend yourself if something goes wrong. You're essentially betting everything on a single, decisive strike. Sasuke absorbed this carefully, filing away every detail. And if it goes wrong, the chakra can backlash against your own arm, Kakashi said bluntly. Severe muscle damage, at minimum. In the worst cases, permanent nerve damage. This is not a technique to rush. Sasuke nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was about to attempt, and yet finding that gravity did nothing to diminish his determination to master it. They started with the fundamentals, first, simply generating a controlled flow of lightning-natured chakra in the palm, without any attempt to shape it into the technique's final form. Sasuke's chakra crackled weakly at first, sparking and fizzling out almost as quickly as it formed, a far cry from the dense, roaring concentration Kakashi had demonstrated. This is going to take time, Kakashi warned him. Don't expect results overnight. Lightning nature manipulation is difficult under the best of circumstances, and you're attempting a variant I developed myself, which means there's no established curriculum to follow, just careful, incremental progress. Sasuke gritted his teeth and kept trying, day after day, his palms sparking with increasingly stronger, though still wildly unstable, bursts of chakra. Unlike Naruto, Sasuke didn't have shadow clones to multiply his repetitions. He had only himself, his own steadily accumulating exhaustion, and a stubborn, quiet determination that refused to accept anything less than eventual mastery. You're pushing yourself too hard, Kakashi observed one afternoon, watching Sasuke's hands shake slightly from the strain of repeated attempts, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the mild weather. Chakra exhaustion isn't something to push through carelessly. Rest when your body tells you to rest. I don't have clones to rely on, Sasuke said, a flicker of something bitter creeping into his voice before he could fully suppress it. Naruto gets to fail 100 times at once and still walk away with the lesson. I only get to fail once at a time. Kakashi studied him for a long moment, recognizing the particular shape of the frustration simmering beneath Sasuke's composed exterior. Not simple rivalry, but something more complicated. A lifetime of comparison and expectation weighing on shoulders that were still, in the end, only 13 years old. You're not wrong that his training method offers advantages yours doesn't, Kakashi said carefully. But you're forgetting something important, Sasuke. What's that? Your Sharingan, Kakashi said. Every time you activate it during training, you're capturing details most shinobi would completely miss. The precise mechanics of chakra flow, the exact moment of instability before a technique destabilizes, patterns that would take an ordinary shinobi far longer to consciously recognize. You're not learning at the same pace as Naruto. You're learning through a completely different method, one that plays entirely to your own unique strengths. Sasuke considered this, some of the bitterness in his expression easing slightly. Comparing your progress to his isn't going to help either one of you, Kakashi continued. You have different tools. Use the ones you actually have, instead of resenting the ones you don't. Sasuke was quiet for a long moment, turning that over. It wasn't the reassurance he might have expected, no easy flattery, no dismissal of the genuine difficulty of what he was attempting, just a clear, honest reframing of the problem in front of him. All right, Sasuke said finally, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Let's keep going. But maybe not push quite as hard today. Kakashi's visible eye crinkled with quiet approval. Now that's real progress. Word of Sasuke's intense training regimen had, inevitably, begun to filter through the rest of the rookie genin population, carried along the same informal grapevine that had already informed Kiba and Ino about Team 7's delayed Chūnin Exam nomination. It reached Sasuke directly on the 12th day, in the form of an unexpected visit from Rock Lee, the very same academy student Guy had mentioned, whose reputation as a taijutsu prodigy without bloodline talent had spread quietly through certain circles of the genin population. Lee found Sasuke resting near the edge of the training ground during a brief break, still catching his breath from an intense series of Chidori practice attempts. Sasuke Uchiha, Lee said, standing with a posture so rigidly formal it bordered on comical, though there was nothing insincere about the sharp focus in his eyes. Guy-sensei has told me about your training. I wish to see your progress for myself. Sasuke eyed him warily, unsure quite what to make of the intensity radiating off this unfamiliar genin. And, your form has improved considerably since Guy-sensei began training you, Lee said, with the blunt honesty of someone entirely unconcerned with social niceties. But you rely too heavily on your bloodline to compensate for gaps in your fundamental technique. If you continue training only with Guy-sensei's methods, that reliance will eventually become a weakness rather than a strength. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. You've been watching my training? Briefly, Lee admitted. Guy-sensei believes there is value in genin observing each other's growth, provided it is done with respect rather than mockery. I intend no disrespect, Sasuke Uchiha. Only honest observation, made in the spirit of mutual improvement. There was something disarming about the earnestness of the statement. No hidden agenda, no attempt to needle him the way Naruto sometimes did in their more competitive moments, just a straightforward, almost old-fashioned code of honor that Sasuke found, somewhat to his own surprise, difficult to dismiss outright. What would you suggest then? Sasuke asked, more out of curiosity than genuine expectation. Lee's serious expression brightened slightly, clearly pleased by the openness of the question. Sparring. Real sparring, without your Sharingan active at first, to ensure your fundamental technique can stand on its own before you layer your bloodline's advantages back on top of it. Sasuke considered the suggestion, weighing his own pride against the very real logic underlying it. He thought about the ice mirrors again, about how easily his Sharingan alone had failed to save him, precisely because the fundamentals beneath it hadn't been strong enough to support what his eyes were perceiving. Fine, Sasuke said. One match. The sparring match that followed was, by Sasuke's own later admission, one of the more genuinely humbling experiences of his 6 weeks of training. Rock Lee, without any ninjutsu or genjutsu ability whatsoever, a limitation that would have crippled almost any other shinobi's development, moved with a fluid, explosive taijutsu style built entirely on raw physical conditioning and relentless, years-long dedication. Sasuke, even with his Sharingan deactivated as agreed, found himself struggling to match Lee's pace, his own still developing fundamentals exposed clearly against an opponent whose technique had nothing to hide behind. It ended not with a decisive victory for either side, but with both of them breathing hard, evenly matched in a way that surprised Sasuke considerably more than he wanted to admit. You held your own, Lee said, offering a hand to help Sasuke up from where a particularly well-placed sweep had put him briefly on the ground. Better than I expected, honestly, given how much of your training so far has focused on chakra-based techniques rather than pure taijutsu fundamentals. Sasuke accepted the hand, allowing himself a small, genuine nod of respect. You're better than I expected too. Guy-sensei says hard work can overcome genius, Lee said, with the same earnest intensity that seemed to color everything he said. I intend to prove that every single day, for as long as it takes. Sasuke studied him for a long moment, something shifting quietly in his own understanding of what genuine dedication looked like, stripped of any bloodline advantage at all. Same match next week? Sasuke offered, somewhat to his own surprise. Lee's face lit up with unrestrained enthusiasm. I would be honored. That evening, walking back toward the Uchiha compound under a sky just beginning to darken toward dusk, Sasuke found himself thinking about the day's events with unusual clarity. He thought about Guy's insistence on fundamentals, about Kakashi's warning against comparing his own progress to Naruto's, About Lee's blunt observation regarding his reliance on the Sharingan to compensate for gaps that shouldn't have existed in the first place. For the first time in longer than he could easily remember, Sasuke felt something that wasn't quite the familiar, isolating weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him, the constant, exhausting comparison to Itachi, the unspoken expectation that greatness was owed to him by birthright rather than earned through effort. Instead, he felt something closer to genuine forward momentum. Progress that belonged entirely to him, built through his own effort, rather than inherited through blood alone. He thought, briefly, of his brother, of the enormous, seemingly insurmountable gap between where he currently stood, and where Itachi had already been at an age not much older than Sasuke was now. One step at a time, Sasuke told himself, letting the thought settle rather than spiraling into the familiar despair that usually accompanied it. I'm not there yet. But I'm closer than I was a month ago. That has to count for something. By the third week of training, Sasuke's Chidori had progressed from unstable, sparking bursts of chakra to something that finally, tentatively, began to resemble the technique Kakashi had originally demonstrated, though still far from the level of mastery Kakashi himself displayed. The breakthrough came, somewhat fittingly, during a training session that combined everything Sasuke had been working on simultaneously: Gai's taijutsu fundamentals, Kakashi's chakra-shaping theory, and the growing precision of his Sharingan, now firmly settled into its second tomo after weeks of consistent activation during high-stress training. Today, Kakashi said, standing across from Sasuke in the training ground, a series of wooden practice posts arranged in a loose formation between them, I want you to attempt the full technique, not just generating the chakra, actually channeling it forward, into a target. Sasuke's heart rate quickened, a mixture of anticipation and genuine nervousness he was careful not to let show too openly on his face. Are you ready? Kakashi asked, watching him carefully. Sasuke thought about the ice mirrors. About Lee's relentless dedication. About Naruto, somewhere else in the village at that exact moment, almost certainly pushing himself through some equally grueling stage of his own training. Yes, Sasuke said. Activate your Sharingan, Kakashi instructed. I want you tracking the chakra flow as closely as possible during this attempt. It'll help you correct your form in real time, rather than relying entirely on muscle memory that isn't fully developed yet. Sasuke's eyes shifted, the familiar sensation of his Sharingan activating settling over him, no longer the disorienting strain it had been weeks earlier, but something closer to a natural extension of his own perception now, thanks to weeks of Gai's relentless conditioning. He raised his right hand, focusing everything he'd learned over the past 3 weeks into a single, concentrated effort. The theory Kakashi had explained, the fundamentals Gai had drilled into him, the precise chakra control he'd been building session after grueling session. Chakra began to gather in his palm, crackling weakly at first, then building in intensity as Sasuke poured his focus into shaping it, not the wild, uncontrolled sparks of his earliest attempts, but something denser, more concentrated, beginning to genuinely resemble the sound Kakashi's own technique produced. A sharp, chirping crackle filled the air, growing louder, more insistent. Good, Kakashi said, watching intently. Now forward. Controlled speed, not reckless. Remember what I told you about the risk of backlash. Sasuke fixed his Sharingan on the nearest wooden practice post, and channeled every ounce of concentration he possessed into a single, decisive lunge, chakra crackling and roaring around his outstretched hand. The strike connected with the wooden post in a burst of splintering wood and scattered sparks, the crackling chakra tearing through solid timber with a force that sent fragments scattering across the training ground. Sasuke staggered back, his arms shaking violently from the strain, chakra exhaustion hitting him in an abrupt, disorienting wave. But he was still standing. His arm, though trembling and clearly overtaxed, showed no sign of the severe backlash damage Kakashi had warned him about. He stared down at the destroyed practice post, reduced to splintered fragments, a clean, precise hole torn directly through its center, and felt something fierce and triumphant rise up in his chest. I did it, Sasuke said, breathless, staring at his own trembling hand like he barely recognized it. I actually did it. Kakashi studied the destroyed post with genuine, evident approval. That was unstable, rougher than it needs to be, and you pushed your chakra reserves further than I'd like this early in training. But that was, without question, a functional Chidori. Sasuke's chest was heaving, exhaustion pulling at every muscle in his body, and yet none of it mattered in that moment, not against the overwhelming satisfaction of finally, genuinely closing a gap that had felt insurmountable only weeks earlier. "We're not doing that again today," Kakashi said firmly, noting the visible strain in Sasuke's posture. "Your chakra control needs significant refinement before this technique is anywhere close to safe for regular use. But that was an excellent first attempt, better, honestly, than I expected this early in your training." Sasuke nodded, too exhausted to manage much more than that, but the fierce, quiet satisfaction burning behind his dark eyes said more than words could have. That night, sitting alone in the quiet of the Uchiha compound, Sasuke examined his still trembling right hand under the dim light of a single lantern, replaying the sensation of the technique over and over in his mind, the crackling chakra, the explosive release, the satisfying, decisive impact against the practice post. For the first time since the mission to the Land of Waves, since the humiliating helplessness of being trapped inside Haku's ice mirrors, Sasuke felt something approaching genuine confidence. Not the arrogant, inherited confidence of clan prestige and bloodline legacy, but something earned, built through weeks of grueling taijutsu drills, through Gai's relentless conditioning, through Kakashi's careful, deliberate instruction, through his own stubborn refusal to fall behind. He thought about his brother, about the impossible gap that had defined his entire sense of purpose for as long as he could remember. The gap was still there. He wasn't naive enough to believe otherwise. One unstable Chidori against a wooden training post was a far cry from anything resembling a real threat to someone like Itachi. But for the first time, that gap felt like something he was actively closing, rather than something fixed and permanent, inherited alongside a legacy he'd never asked for. One technique at a time, Sasuke thought, finally allowing himself to lie back against his bedroll, exhaustion pulling him towards sleep. "I'll close the whole distance eventually. However long it takes." Elsewhere in the village that same evening, word of Sasuke's progress had already begun reaching Kakashi's other students in the particular, informal way that news tends to travel among people who spend most of their waking hours training in overlapping parts of the same village. Naruto, catching wind of it from an offhand comment Guy made while passing through the training ground, felt a familiar spike of competitive fire ignite in his chest. A working Chidori already, huh? Naruto thought, glancing down at his own hands that, over the past several weeks, had learned to shape wind chakra with a precision he never would have believed himself capable of only a month earlier. "Guess I'd better make sure that scroll technique is worth the wait then." Meanwhile, Sakura, whose own training had been quietly, steadily progressing under an instructor whose sharp red eyes seemed to catch every flaw in her chakra control with unnerving precision, filed the news, away with a quiet, determined resolve of her own. Everyone's finding their strength, she thought, flexing fingers that, over the past 2 weeks, had begun demonstrating a startling, controlled capacity for concentrated, chakra-enhanced force. "I'm not going to be the one left behind." 3 Genin. 3 parallel paths toward genuine strength, each one discovering exactly how much untapped potential had been sitting inside them all along, waiting for someone to finally take the time to unlock it. And Sakura's own transformation, as it turns out, is about to become the centerpiece of our next chapter, because the training she's been quietly undergoing is unlike anything either of her teammates have experienced, and it's about to reveal a side of her that even she never knew she had. Rewind for a second to that moment on the bridge in the Land of Waves, the moment we spent most of Chapter 1 sitting inside. Haku appears directly in front of Sakura, ready to finish off an unconscious child she's been ordered to protect, and all she has is a kunai and pure, desperate will. It worked. Barely. But Sakura Haruno knew, better than anyone, exactly how thin that margin had been, and in the quiet weeks that followed, while Naruto discovered a legacy hidden in a dusty archive scroll and Sasuke tore a hole through a wooden training post with his very first working Chidori, Sakura was undergoing a transformation of her own, quieter, less flashy, but every bit as significant. The woman Kakashi had introduced back in Chapter 2, the one with sharp red eyes and an air of quiet, unshakable focus, had a name Sakura recognized the moment Kakashi said it out loud: Kurenai Yuhi, Jonin sensei of Team 8, renowned throughout the village for her mastery of Genjutsu. Genjutsu, Sakura repeated slowly, on that very first morning of specialized training, standing across from Kurenai in a quiet, secluded section of the training ground reserved specifically for illusion-based techniques. Kakashi-sensei said you'd be helping with my chakra control. I didn't realize that meant genjutsu. It's part of it, Kurenai said, her voice calm and measured, carrying an authority that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Chakra control isn't just about how much force you can generate, Sakura. It's about precision, the ability to shape and direct chakra exactly where you want it, with exactly the intensity you intend. Genjutsu is one of the purest tests of that precision that exists in this world. Sakura absorbed this, already reaching for the small notebook she habitually carried, before Kurenai's next words stopped her. Put that away, Kurenai said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that left no room for negotiation. For what we're about to work on, you're not going to learn it from notes. You're going to learn it by feeling it, over and over, until your body understands something your mind can't fully capture on paper. Sakura hesitated, then slowly tucked the notebook back into her pouch, feeling strangely exposed without the familiar comfort of something to write in. Good, Kurenai said. Now, do you know why so few kunoichi ever properly master genjutsu, despite it requiring less raw chakra than most ninjutsu techniques? Sakura thought about it seriously, actually turning the question over rather than reaching for a memorized textbook answer. Because it's about control, not power. And most people train for power because it's easier to see results. Something flickered across Kurenai's expression, the faintest, genuine flash of approval. Exactly right. Most shinobi chase raw strength because it's immediate, visible, satisfying. Precision takes longer to develop and offers far less obvious reward along the way. It requires patience most people simply don't have. I have patience, Sakura said, and there was something quietly fierce in the way she said it, not boastful, not eager to impress, just plainly, simply true. Kurenai studied her for a long moment, red eyes sharp and assessing in a way that made Sakura feel, not uncomfortable exactly, but genuinely seen for perhaps the first time in longer than she could remember. Kakashi told me you have excellent chakra control, Kurenai said. Better than I expected to hear from a gen your age. Let's find out exactly how good. The first exercise Kurenai set for her was deceptively simple in description and, as Sakura quickly discovered, brutally demanding in execution. Genjutsu works by disrupting an opponent's chakra flow, subtly altering how their brain interprets sensory information, Kurenai explained, demonstrating with a small, controlled pulse of chakra that made the world around Sakura shimmer faintly for just a fraction of a second. Nothing dramatic, nothing overwhelming, just the faintest suggestion of something not quite right. Before you can cast a genjutsu of your own, you need to understand precisely how chakra feels when it's being manipulated that way. And before that, you need to be able to detect it in someone else. The first and most important skill for any kunoichi walking into a world where illusions are used against her constantly. How do I learn to detect it? By experiencing it, repeatedly, until you learn to recognize the specific texture of disrupted chakra flow, Kurenai said. I'm going to cast a series of low-level illusions on you. Your task is simply to notice when something is wrong, not necessarily to break free of it, not yet, just to notice. Sakura nodded, steeling herself. The first illusion hit without warning. The sky above her shifted subtly, clouds moving in a pattern that felt, on some level she couldn't quite articulate, fundamentally incorrect. She blinked, and it was gone. That one, Kurenai said. Did you feel it? Maybe? I'm not sure. It felt like something was off, but I couldn't say what. That's actually a good answer, Kurenai said. Most people either miss it entirely or convince themselves they imagined the discrepancy. The fact that you registered something wrong at all, on your very first attempt, tells me your baseline chakra sensitivity is already quite strong. Sakura felt a small, unexpected swell of pride at that. We're going to do this over and over, Kurenai continued. Dozens of times today alone. Eventually, the sensation of disrupted chakra will become as obvious to you as a sour taste on your tongue. Impossible to miss, impossible to mistake for anything else. And that's precisely what happened, over the course of the following days. A slow, steady sharpening of a sense Sakura hadn't even known she possessed. Kurenai layered illusion after illusion into their training sessions, each one subtly different, each one demanding a slightly sharper degree of perception to detect. By the fourth day, Sakura could identify roughly 7 out of every 10 illusions Kurenai cast on her within seconds of their onset. By the 6th day, that number had climbed to 9 out of 10. You're progressing faster than most of the genin I've trained, Kurenai told her, genuine approval evident in her measured tone. Faster, honestly, than most of the Chūnin I've trained too. Really? Sakura asked, unable to fully keep the surprise from her voice. Really, Kurenai confirmed. Chakra sensitivity like yours is rare, Sakura. Most people spend years developing what you've developed in less than a week. I want you to understand something important about that. What's that? For your entire academy career, people have told you that your greatest strength is your intelligence, your memory, your ability to recite technique theory, your test scores, Kurenai said, and those things matter. But what I'm watching develop in you right now is something else entirely. A genuine, rare talent for precise chakra manipulation, the kind that could eventually make you exceptionally difficult to deceive, and exceptionally dangerous to face in direct combat. Sakura was quiet for a long moment, turning the words over carefully. Nobody had ever described her using the word dangerous before. Ever. I want to be dangerous, Sakura said finally, quietly, more to herself than to Kurenai. I'm done being the one who has to be protected. Kurenai's expression softened slightly, something almost maternal passing behind her sharp red eyes. Then let's make sure that happens. Here's something worth pausing on. If you've watched enough of these stories to know how the pattern usually goes, in the version of events you already know, Sakura Haruno spends years being underestimated. By her enemies, by strangers, and honestly, by the story itself, at least until Tsunade finally takes her under direct tutelage much later down the line. It's not that she lacks potential in the original story. It's that nobody bothers to properly cultivate it until circumstances force the issue. This series exists precisely to ask what happens when someone recognizes that potential early. When a woman like Kurenai Yuhi looks at a 13-year-old genin, and sees not just a smart one, but a kunoichi with genuinely rare natural gifts, worth investing real time and effort into properly developing. We're about to find out exactly how far that early investment can carry her. The genjutsu detection training, as demanding as it was, turned out to be only the first half of what Kakashi had planned for Sakura's specialized development. On the 10th day, following her session with Kurenai, Kakashi arrived at the training ground accompanying an unfamiliar figure, an older woman, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing the distinctive medical insignia of Konoha's hospital staff over a simple, high-collared tunic and long practical trousers, sleeves buttoned neatly at the wrist despite the warm afternoon air. Sakura, Kakashi said, this is Ryoko. She's one of the senior medical nin at Konoha Hospital, and she's agreed to spend some time with you covering the fundamentals of medical ninjutsu theory. Ryoko studied Sakura with the same sharp, assessing gaze Sakura had grown accustomed to from Kurenai, the particular scrutiny of a professional evaluating raw material rather than a finished product. Kakashi tells me your chakra control is exceptional, Ryoko said, her voice carrying the brisk, no-nonsense efficiency of someone accustomed to working under pressure in a hospital environment. That's good. Medical ninjutsu demands more precise control than nearly any other discipline in the shinobi arts. More, honestly, than most combat techniques require. I thought medical training usually took years before students even touched real patients, Sakura said, unable to fully suppress her curiosity. It does, typically, Ryoko agreed. I'm not here to make you a fully trained medic in 6 weeks. That would be dishonest to promise, and dangerous to attempt. What I am here to teach you are the foundational principles, how to sense and diagnose chakra pathway damage, basic emergency stabilization techniques, and, since Kakashi specifically requested it, the theoretical foundation behind chakra-enhanced physical strength. Sakura's ears perked up at that last part. Chakra-enhanced strength? Like actual physical power? Precisely that, Ryoko confirmed, a faint, knowing smile crossing her face. It's a technique built on the same principle as medical chakra control. Precise, controlled release of chakra directed into your muscles at the exact moment of impact, dramatically amplifying the force behind a strike. Properly executed, even someone of relatively modest physical stature can generate enough force to shatter solid stone. Sakura stared at her, trying to reconcile that description with her own physical frame. Not weak, exactly, but hardly the kind of raw physical presence someone like Ino or the boys on the team possessed. You're doubting whether you're physically capable of it, Ryoko observed, reading the hesitation on Sakura's face with practiced ease. Let me correct that assumption right now. This technique has almost nothing to do with your natural physical strength, and everything to do with your chakra control. Which, as I understand it, happens to be exceptional. Something settled in Sakura's chest, a familiar mixture of nervousness and genuine, rising excitement. Show me, Sakura said. The first stage of the training, much like Kurenai's genjutsu detection exercises, began with a foundation that felt almost frustratingly simple. Before you attempt to enhance a strike with chakra, Ryoko explained, standing beside a sturdy wooden training post reinforced with metal bands, clearly designed to withstand significant impact. You need to understand precisely how chakra interacts with muscle tissue during physical exertion. Most shinobi never bother learning this theory properly. They simply throw raw chakra into a strike and hope for the best, which is inefficient at best and dangerous to your own body at worst. Dangerous how? Sakura asked. Chakra-enhanced strikes place enormous stress on bone and muscle tissue, Ryoko said. Executed without proper control, you risk shattering your own hand or wrist on impact, well before you ever generate enough force to seriously damage whatever you're striking. The entire discipline hinges on precisely timing the chakra release to reinforce your own body at the exact moment of impact, protecting yourself while simultaneously amplifying the force delivered outward. Sakura absorbed this carefully, already turning the theory over in her mind, cross-referencing it against everything she already understood about basic chakra control from her academy training. So it's not just about pushing chakra into my fist, Sakura said slowly, working through the logic out loud. It's about timing, reinforcing my own bones and muscles at the moment of contact, so the force goes outward instead of damaging me. Ryoko's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly pleasantly surprised. That's precisely correct, and faster than I expected you to grasp the underlying theory. Most students need several sessions before that distinction clicks properly. Sakura felt a small, private glow of pride at that, the particular satisfaction of understanding something complex quickly. A feeling she chased through years of academy exams but had never quite experienced in the context of something this directly, physically powerful. All right, Ryoko said, gesturing toward the reinforced training post. Let's see if your body can execute what your mind already understands. Begin with a simple strike. Don't try to hold back, but don't try to overextend either. Focus entirely on the timing of the release. Sakura stepped up to the post, settling into a basic stance, and drew on the same precise, controlled focus she'd been cultivating for days under Kurenai's tutelage, the careful, deliberate awareness of her own chakra flow. She struck. The impact rattled through her arm with a sharp, stinging force, and the wooden post shuddered violently on its base, not shattered, not destroyed, but visibly, undeniably dented from the force of the blow. Sakura stared down at her own fist, then up at the dented post, then back at her fist again, genuinely stunned. That shouldn't have been possible with that little chakra, she said, flexing her fingers experimentally. It wasn't a large amount of chakra, Ryoko confirmed, examining the dented post with clear approval. That's the entire point. Precise, well-timed chakra reinforcement generates far more force per unit of chakra spent than simply throwing raw energy into a strike. What you just demonstrated, on your very first attempt, is more control than I typically see from genins several years into their training. Sakura looked back at her own hand, something fierce and quietly triumphant kindling behind her green eyes. Can we keep going? She asked. I want to actually get good at this. Ryoko's professional composure cracked into a genuine, warm smile. I suspect that won't be a problem at all. Over the following days, Sakura's training split between two distinct disciplines, Kurenai's genjutsu detection and dispelling exercises in the mornings, and Ryoko's chakra-enhanced strength and basic medical theory in the afternoons. It was an exhausting schedule, demanding a level of precise mental and physical focus that left her collapsing into bed each night more thoroughly drained than she'd ever felt after even the most demanding academy exam preparation. But it was, she found, an entirely different kind of exhaustion than she'd expected, not the frustrated, defeated exhaustion of failing at something repeatedly, but the deep, satisfying tiredness of a body and mind genuinely being pushed toward growth. By the second week, Sakura could reliably detect and begin dispelling low to mid-level genjutsu techniques Kurenai cast on her, her reaction time sharpening with each session. Her chakra-enhanced strikes, meanwhile, had progressed from denting reinforced training posts to cracking them outright, the underlying theory of precise timing and controlled release settling deeper and deeper into instinctive muscle memory with each repetition. "You're progressing remarkably quickly," Kurenai observed one afternoon, watching Sakura successfully dispel a moderately complex illusion, one that had taken most of Kurenai's own genin students, including her prized student Hinata Hyuga, considerably longer to master. "I want to ask you something, if you don't mind." "Sure," Sakura said, still catching her breath from the exercise. "Has anyone ever told you, before this training began, that you had this kind of potential?" Kurenai asked, her tone carefully neutral, though something more personal lingered underneath the question. Sakura considered the question for a long moment, old, familiar hurt flickering briefly behind her eyes before she carefully set it aside. "No," she admitted honestly. "Everyone always talked about Sasuke's talent, or Naruto's determination. I was just the smart one. Good grades. Good memory. Nobody ever really talked about me as someone who could actually be strong." Kurenai's expression softened, something quietly understanding passing behind her sharp red eyes, the particular recognition of someone who had likely faced similar dismissiveness in her own early career, in a shinobi world that had, historically, not always been generous toward kunoichi whose strengths didn't manifest as obvious physical power. "That's going to change," Kurenai said simply, with quiet conviction. "Not because of anything I'm teaching you, particularly. I'm simply helping you develop something that was already there. You just needed someone willing to actually look for it." Sakura felt something tighten in her throat, unexpected emotion rising faster than she'd anticipated. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For actually looking." Kurenai reached out and gave her shoulder a brief, warm squeeze, nothing dramatic, nothing that needed further words attached to it, just a quiet acknowledgement passed between them. "Let's keep going," Kurenai said after a moment, stepping back into position. "You've still got a long way to go before you're ready for what's coming." It was during the third week of training that Sakura's progress took an unexpected and genuinely significant leap forward, one that would end up mattering considerably more than anyone, including Sakura herself, fully appreciated in the moment. Ryoko had begun introducing basic medical diagnostic techniques alongside the strength training, teaching Sakura how to channel a careful, controlled pulse of chakra into an injured area to assess the extent of damage, a foundational skill that any properly trained medical knee needed before attempting actual healing techniques. "This is delicate work," Ryoko warned, as Sakura practiced the diagnostic pulse on a series of carefully prepared training dummies rigged with small, harmless simulated injuries designed to test her sensitivity. "Too much chakra, released too roughly, and you risk causing additional damage rather than accurately assessing what's already there. It requires an almost surgical level of restraint." Sakura worked through the exercises with careful, methodical focus, her diagnostic accuracy improving steadily with each attempt, until, on the fourth day of this particular training, something unexpected happened. She was practicing on one of the training dummies, carefully channeling a diagnostic pulse into a simulated fracture, when her chakra, perhaps drawing on some instinctive understanding built from weeks of precise controlled training under both Kurenai and Ryoko, briefly, almost accidentally, shifted from simple diagnosis into something closer to actual repair. The simulated damage, a small crack deliberately built into the training material to mimic a hairline fracture, visibly knitted itself slightly tighter under the careful application of Sakura's chakra. Sakura froze, staring down at her own hand in stunned disbelief. "Ryoko-san," she said slowly, I think I just did something." Ryoko crossed the training ground quickly, examining the dummy's simulated injury with immediate, focused professional interest. "Show me exactly what you did." "Precisely, step by step." Sakura, hands trembling slightly with a mixture of nervousness and rising excitement, repeated the process, the careful diagnostic pulse, and then, almost instinctively, a subtle shift in the chakra's application, directing it not just to observe the damage but to gently, carefully encourage the surrounding material back toward its original state. The crack tightened further under her focused attention. Ryoko watched with an expression that had shifted from professional interest into something closer to genuine astonishment. That, Ryoko said slowly, is an extremely early, rudimentary application of actual medical healing chakra. Most students spend months, sometimes years, working purely on diagnostics before they're even considered ready to attempt genuine repair techniques. Is that good? Sakura asked, still staring at her own hands. Sakura, Ryoko said, her voice carrying an unusual weight of sincerity. In 15 years of training medical nin candidates for this village, I have never seen anyone transition from diagnostic theory to functional repair technique this quickly. Your natural aptitude for this discipline isn't just strong. It may genuinely be exceptional. Sakura felt her breath catch, a dizzying rush of emotion sweeping through her. Pride, disbelief, and underneath it all, a fierce, quiet determination that had been steadily building since that terrifying moment on the bridge in the land of waves. I want to learn more, Sakura said. Whatever you're willing to teach me, in the time we have left, I want to learn all of it. Ryoko studied her for a long moment, something like genuine excitement flickering behind her usually composed professional demeanor. 6 weeks isn't nearly enough time to make you a fully trained medical nin, Ryoko said carefully. I want to be honest with you about that. But it may be enough time to teach you the basics of battlefield emergency stabilization, enough to keep a critically injured teammate alive long enough to reach proper medical care, which, given what I understand about the Chūnin Exams your team is preparing for, could prove to be an invaluable skill. Sakura nodded firmly. Teach me. News of Sakura's rapid progress, the genjutsu detection, the chakra-enhanced strength, and now, most remarkably, the earliest fumbling steps toward actual medical technique, eventually reached Kakashi during one of his regular check-ins with both instructors, roughly a week and a half before the 6-week training period was set to conclude. I'll be honest, Kakashi admitted, standing beside Kurenai and Ryoko at the edge of the training ground, watching Sakura work through a combined exercise that required her to simultaneously detect and dispel a subtle genjutsu while maintaining the precise chakra control necessary for an enhanced strike against a nearby training post. When I first assessed her chakra control back in Chapter 2, I knew she had potential. I didn't fully appreciate just how much. Few people ever do, with kunoichi like her, Kurenai said, a note of quiet frustration coloring her otherwise measured tone. It's an old, tired pattern, brilliant, precise talent overlooked because it doesn't announce itself as loudly as raw physical power or an impressive bloodline. I've seen it happen too many times. She reminds me, honestly, of someone else I once trained alongside, Ryoko added thoughtfully, watching Sakura successfully dispel the genjutsu and immediately follow through with a controlled, chakra-enhanced strike that sent a fresh crack splitting across the reinforced training post. Someone whose reputation, in later years, became rather formidable in medical circles. If Sakura continues developing at this pace, under proper long-term guidance, I genuinely believe she could reach a similar level. Kakashi absorbed this with quiet, genuine satisfaction, thinking back to the girl who had stood frozen on that bridge in the land of waves, armed with nothing but a kunai and desperate will. 3 genin, Kakashi thought, watching all the pieces of his careful 6-week plan steadily, methodically falling into place. 3 completely different kinds of untapped strength. And every single one of them is finally starting to understand exactly what they're actually capable of. That evening, walking home from the training ground alongside her parents' quiet neighborhood street, Sakura found herself replaying the events of the past several weeks with a sense of genuine, hard-won pride she'd rarely allowed herself to feel before. She thought about the girl she'd been on that bridge in the land of waves, frozen, desperate, painfully aware of how little her academy training had actually prepared her for real combat. She thought about years of quietly comparing herself to Ino, to Sasuke's effortless talent, to Naruto's stubborn, unstoppable determination, always feeling, somewhere underneath her carefully maintained confidence, like the least essential member of any team she was placed on. That feeling, she realized, walking beneath the darkening evening sky with fists that could now crack solid stone and a growing, careful understanding of genjutsu and medical technique building steadily inside her, was beginning to fade for the first time in her life. I'm not just the smart one anymore, she thought, flexing her fingers experimentally, feeling the faint, lingering hum of chakra still coursing through her system after a long day of demanding training. I'm becoming someone who can actually protect the people I care about. Someone dangerous, in exactly the way I need to be. She thought, briefly, of Naruto's growing mastery over wind chakra, of Sasuke's hard-won Chidori, each of her teammates discovering, in their own separate ways, strength they hadn't fully known they possessed. We're not the same team that almost died on that bridge anymore, Sakura thought, a fierce, quiet smile crossing her face as she continued walking home beneath the stars. Whatever the Chūnin exams throw at us, I think we're actually going to be ready.